Okay, we are live now, so let's get ready to get started. Good morning. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Design Commission, and welcome to the PDC Public Meeting. If you're joining us via Zoom and would like to testify, please sign up through the Google form, which is linked on our meeting agenda. Commissioners, a reminder to please bring the microphone close to you when talking so our Zoom members can hear us. Over to you, Deborah.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Martin. I'm the Chair of the Public Design Commission. Welcome to the Public Design Commission meeting. As New York City's design review agency, the Public Design Commission, PDC, has jurisdiction over the design of permanent structures, landscape architecture, and art proposed on or over city-owned property. Today's meeting is being held in person at City Hall. Members of the public can attend and give testimony either in person or remotely. The public meeting is now commencing with the consent agenda and items number 29889 to 29923. Before we take a vote on the consent agenda, are there any recusals to note? Okay, great. Seeing none, I'll now call for the vote. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote for the consent agenda. Isabel Castilla.
Approval.
Lori Hawkinson.
Approval.
Bill Heinzen.
Approval.
Carrie Maloney.
Approval.
Manuel Miranda.
Approval.
Jimmy Van Bramer.
Approval.
I also approve all, so let the record show that the consent agenda is passed unanimously. It's not working. Let's do this. Okay, we'll now continue with the public hearing portion of the meeting. The first public hearing item is number 29924, preliminary review of the installation of I Am Protected by Jasmine Hayes at the Brownsville Multi-Service Center and Community Hub at 444 Thomas S. Boylan Street between East New York Avenue and Pitkin Avenue in Brooklyn. Per standard procedure, applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We will hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants. We can now proceed with the presentation. And presenters, you are very welcome to start. Hi, Jasmine.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time and your presence today. My name is Jasmine Hayes. I'm a visual artist, muralist, educator, and researcher, born and raised from East New York, Brooklyn. I want to first thank my team who has worked tirelessness with me on this presentation. It is now 108 pages, and so I will try and breeze through this as fast as possible. So I'm going to go through some of these quite quickly. I won't do an overview on Brownsville at the moment. For those who are home, this document is available to the public online. Okay. Here we are. Okay, so just to reiterate the themes of this project, I wanted to focus on themes of healing, protection, and art as prayers of affirmation for the community of Brownsville. Originally, this project was titled the Brownsville Youth Empowerment Center. And so my intention is always to speak to the community, to the youth. We now have 4 working titles under the title I Am Protected. These 4 working titles form one poem, and I will read that for you. In my mother's garden, I am divinely guided. Like the seeds in my cornrows, I shall grow tall to the skies. There we go. So the first design located on the left wall facing the street and the garden wall is the garden wall, excuse me. It is titled In My Mother's Garden. So we have some elevation drawings. This is a in situ rendering. It will be approximately 13 feet by 21 feet. It is very large. It will be a copper relief sculpture. We've had some, since we've last spoken in June,
We've had material development, installation development, as far as maintenance development. So this is the 3D rendering of the design. And so to your left here, you will see the turquoise patina that represents the river and the water going throughout the design. You also have the braided pattern that is a replica of the aerial view of the NYCHA mapping system of Brownsville houses. And then there is also a green variegated patina for the foliage and the design. And so these are just some 3D renderings. So to introduce the process, this is a forged copper process. This is a digital rendering used as a reference. And from that reference, we create this 3D rendering to send to the fabricators to create using flat copper sheets stock, which is secured over temporary forms like sandbags for bracing. And then the next step is the general design is sketched on the copper sheets by hand using the digital rendering as a reference. A handheld hammer with various shaped chisel tips, as well as hand tools and hammers, are used to shape the panels along the reference lines by hammering and pressing the panels into shape. And then the panels are welded together to make seamless transitions. And so you could see part of that process here. This is the side view, a perspective view, and then a top view. So far, we don't have this in front of you. I myself could not carry a 3 by 3 foot copper plate, but we have this coming in hopefully this week from our fabricators. This is a 3 foot by 3 foot prototype. And so the process here, you have the unfinished copper mock-up, which is actually quite beautiful. The first step is a round of polishing, and then this is the finished polishing technique. And so right now, we are discussing like what lines I may want to shift, different things that I want to shift to represent. Thank you so much. To represent the detail in design. To this bottom right corner, we have the patina reference, which we're also working for it to look more closely to these 3 designs here or examples here. So we have the foliage green that will go onto the foliage of the design, and then the aqua blue and the verdigris green. We're hoping to mix those 2 to get the exact patina to match the actual design. The second design is I Am Divinely Guided, located in the HRA and BK CB16 lobby. Really trying to get the use of this thing. Okay, so we have an in situ rendering here. The design or the sculpture will be 10 feet by 8.5 feet. And so these are just some renderings. And so this will consist of 444 cowrie shells made from resin. The shells will form a spiral shape. The original themes of this were to speak on the spiral as transition, the cowrie shell as protection. We have 3 different shapes of the cowrie shell, which are the money cowrie, the egg cowrie, and the Jenna cowrie, to represent the different waters that we come from, the different coastlines that connect us. And there are 3 color treatments of the cowrie shells: ivory, copper, and a translucent shell embedded with recycled plastic. I want to speak specifically to the material of this project. The original themes were speaking on environmental injustice in relation to racial injustices, specifically speaking to the Brownsville community. And so in this first shell here, Let me actually slide through for people at home. I'll come back to those other slides. But basically, we have an example here with the embedded plastic. And so I will be working with a community organization. We are still figuring out which organization that is, but working closely with a community organization to collect recycled material within the community. The colors will be blues, creams, to kind of keep this theme of tranquility throughout all the designs. And then there will also be a copper finish as well. So here you may see some like details where on the actual shell, this will be polished out and sanded out before installation. And so to show you the process, we create a 3D print from digital rendering. And from that 3D print, we create, silicone molds are made from the 3D prints. Resin is cast into the molds to make the final cowrie shells, which you have in front of you today. They will be sized at 8 inches and 10 inches. The process of the plastic is basically embedding it into the mold, the cast of the cowrie shell. There were quite a bit of questions on installation and the security of this piece because it is quite a bit of heavy piece. It is under 2,000 pounds, which is our limit. But I've been working with engineers to look at a steel piping system that will securely install each shell individually. Okay, and the next design is like the seeds in my corn rolls. This will go in the youth empowerment lobby. Yes, my bad. I'm holding on to this like it's my baby. Touch everything you need to. You can pass that around. I'm so sorry. And also just feel free, if I'm going too fast, if you have a question, I know we have a question portion, but feel free to ask. Okay, so since you've last seen this, we now have color, we have some more design to this. I constructed 3 workshops with the Youth Design Center located in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and worked with the Robert Blackburn printmaking workshop to further this design. So the theme of this design is using pattern as reclamation, looking specifically at NYCHA architectural structures in relation to carceral architectural structures across New York City and the United States. And so wanted to put a positive storyline to these spaces. And so let's go to this example first. The material that I have chosen is the Baltic birchwood. It has a lot of spiritual meaning to it and is also easily carvable. It's often used for drums, etc., and different materials. And so the wood will be stained. Thank you. We can pass this around. So the panels underneath to this left side keep the original design of the Brownsville houses mapping system. And on top of those panels, CNC milled braid will go across those panels and designs that the youth essentially created through these workshops. The youth created different patterns that they wanted to see around them, representing different things like protection. I essentially asked the youth, what would they want their space to look like? And so, let's see. So here you see The braids, I basically took designs from the youth and created and collaged it into different patterning. So here you kind of have like this water wave, you have this circle in the center. This was a symbol of peace, which was a Celtic symbol, I believe. And so they wanted to represent tranquility and peace also in their designs. And I wanted to also represent that in this final design. This essentially comes from my coded series, which is in the conceptual design, also available online for those who have not seen the project, in which I am, oh, is that my time? Oh my God. Okay. Essentially, I am creating paper debossments using a braided technique. And so creating collagraphs to create a relief surface on plates. And so this is an example of that specific series. I got so nervous. I was like, is this my time? So these are some examples. The wood will be stained in different hues of blues. And then these are some phenomenal photos from the workshops that we created. We had a master printer from the Robert Blackburn print shop, also named Jasmine. So it was a Jasmine Squared project, working at the Youth Design Center. And we had about 10 to 12 participants, supplied stipends for them from the budget, and really just wanted them to have a say in this design overall. You could see here like the nitrogen mapping system, and you kind of see that replicated into the final design. So essentially the youth created different patterns, different shapes, and put it onto a plate to create texture, which is called a collagraph. Some of them did a blind print with no color, which is kind of, this is my work here, which is an example of that. But they also had the opportunity to play in some ink, which was really messy. We gave them like 3 colors and they were like, we need more color. But overall, that is Jasmine. It was a really beautiful experience. Okay. We got a lot of slides. The last design is I Shall Grow Tall to the Skies, located in the multi-purpose lobby. And so this is an in situ rendering of the Moko Jambi figure, the Moko meaning healer, Jambi coming from the Congolese term Zambi, which represents spirit or protector. And so overall, the theme of this is the Moko Jambi is the protector of the village. Brownsville is beautifully called the Ville, and so that is short for the village. And so I wanted to instill those thoughts of protection and also have a cultural reference to the community. This is our most complex design, actually, which we didn't expect, but there will be 4 parts to this design. So the first part are the planets, which will slightly protrude from the wall, made by a CNC milled acrylic sheet with a copper paint finish. The second portion is here. It is the torso, which you can see here. It is the head and the torso made from a CNC milled acrylic sheet and hand painted as well. And then we have the Moko pants, which essentially is a relief. It will be CNC milled as well. The material is an EPS high density foam, or a better terminology is a high density urethane. It will have a hard coat application and a single color painted primer. To the right here, you can see it outlined in red. It's kind of hard to see here on the screen. But basically, this will be panelized into sections and installed. It won't be like single sheets. That's a lot of work. So I want to make sure that's clear. Yes.
What happens, same kind of thickness?
This is something that I need to speak with to the team, but it will have approximately the same type of thickness and it will be rounded, just thinking about like kids, adults, people are clumsy. We don't want anyone running into a corner of anything.
Oh, yeah, sorry. My question was whether this is the material that will be deployed and whether it will have this thickness.
Yeah,
To which you answered, yes, it's the material and it will have some thickness, but perhaps not exactly the same as this, right?
yeah. And it will be rounded like on any
And it
edges
will
to
be
make sure
round.
it's not as sharp.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. And so this is the fourth part of the design, which is a rag roll finish. Ooh, dang, my bad. It's a lot of pages. I'm trying to get through fast. Okay, wait. Okay, there we go. So this is, yes, it's just,
These are the pants.
yes,
And then these are the.
The planetary-
Constellations.
yes.
Okay.
So the planetary orbs that will go on the head, this will slightly protrude out, almost like a cone shape from the wall. So this one will, and then this larger one will. It won't go out too far. Of course, we have limitations, et cetera. And then the torso will be hand painted. Again, also texture, we'll have lots of texture as well. And then you also have the sample of the rag roll. So the samples that you have in front of you today, it is matte. It's just the paint finish. I hear you talking about it. Yeah. Yes. So we are, my team specifically is talking about an intense hard coat application. It will also have a sheen to it. The rag roll finish will also have a sheen to it as well, just to think about like any matte things, it's easily, you can destroy it very easily. This is also another opportunity for community engagement for a one-day astronomy-based art making workshop using references of constellations and planets. Parents, elders, and youth are welcome to attend to create an intergenerational activity with the Brownsville community. Workshop outcomes will inform the design development of the Moko Jumbi pants. And so there will be select pieces of the pants that will have drawings in this style. And so you could see here, these are just some examples from another project created specifically for the Brownsville houses. Yeah, I think that's most of it. We will go into signage now. I will come back to this slide, but the material of the signage will be laser engraved copper plates with black infill, which you can see here on the text. Each design, or excuse me, each sign will have like part of the design relieved onto the copper plate as well. They will all be sized by 11 inches and 14 inches. So these are just examples of placement. And then maintenance. I really want to keep maintenance as minimal as possible. Getting excited again. So the garden wall will have a graffiti coating or sealant and minor rinsing with a hose. This will routinely happen once a year, as well as also this graffiti coating will help with the patina like aging fast. It will actually slow down the patina aging on the copper sculpture. I am okay with the aging of the sculpture, honestly speaking, as the neighborhood changes, et cetera. The HRA and CB16 lobby will have periodic dusting. The HRA has agreed to doing this routinely every 6 months, where someone will come in. We've talked about a vacuum system versus like the dust being blown everywhere. I was just like, where will the dust go? And so it would just go in other places. And so using a vacuum system to dust the cowrie shells We've changed slightly the positioning to make sure it is accessible. And it will have to happen after hours when there's not as much traffic in the building, of course. The youth empowerment lobby will also include a dirt-resistant sealant and occasional wiping down. And then the multi-purpose lobby will also include those same things. And then we have a long appendix, which I feel like may come up. I just want to read this signage to you and I will close out. In My Mother's Garden, one of the 4 artworks at the Brownsville Multi-Service Center and Community Hub is designed to create a space of healing, care, and reclamation. Many cultures see copper as a protective metal, warding off negative energies. The artwork depicts a reciprocal relationship between a young gardener and the deity. The gardener plants the seed while the deity pours water back into the land, symbolizing nurturance and cyclical care. The gardener's braids extend throughout the design, visually threading continuity and connection. Out of a cowrie shell symbolizing protection sprouts a dumb cane plant known for its spiritual meanings of resilience, abundance, and balance. The deity in a prayer stance has an enlarged ear actively listening with water streaming from it, embodying the flow of protection and transformation. The sun and moon in the design evokes a harmonious balance of masculine and feminine energies. And My Mother's Garden overlooks a sanctuary of care where every visitor is embraced by a cycle of protection and renewal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, well, me and the studio manager, we worked tirelessly on this. And so each design has a very detailed description of the work and the themes of the work.
Thank you so much. Before we get into the discussion portion, I just want to check if we have any testimony for this project. Chelsea, has anyone signed up for remote testimony?
We do not have anyone signed up for remote testimony. Is anyone within the Zoom room here to testify? If so, please use the raise hand feature. There are no hands, so we are okay to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. I also do not see anybody in person here or signed up, so we can now move on to the discussion portion. Commissioners?
Jimmy, please.
Thank you so much. This is so beautiful. And it was great the first time we saw it. But it's somehow even better. And I want to thank you for the inclusion of the color in the youth empowerment lobby. I think I was one of the folks who was inquiring about more color there. It's so gorgeous. You have 4 pieces. It's with each piece, you're like, oh, I wonder if the next one will be as good and as exciting. And then it is, and then it is, and then it is. The storyline, the narrative throughout is just really, really empowering and powerful. I love that you include the public housing throughout and weave it literally throughout the pieces. It's just so important. And it's gorgeous, the braided patterns. Even talking about the Ville, which is something that folks maybe here, including myself, are not aware of, but you're making us aware of the
It's
Lobo
village.
community. Yeah, and it
The
speaks
village
to
raises the child.
it speaks to how embedded you are in the village, right? That you're serving here. It's just really, really gorgeous. And then these materials and colors. It's a project that is so exciting to think that people will be able to see it and be there and touch it. Maybe not too much, but a little bit. And we all can see it too. It's such an amazing, amazing addition to Brownsville, but also the city of New York. So just gorgeous.
Thank you so much, Demi.
Yeah, I just want to
Hi,
thank you,
Lauren.
and it's second that and say it's an exemplary project. It's really an exemplary project. And I appreciate so much about it, but just specifically, I wanted to talk about the materials and the
Yeah.
detailing, because I think you've really taken this to another level of projects we've seen. And I'm sure you're working with Silman, structural engineer, and all those attachments, and it just, it's both innovative and feels a part of the place at the same time, you know, that it can, because of the content that you're working with. I also wanted to commend you on the signage, because it's just fantastic to have somebody be thinking of that and making it part of the whole project and placing it and writing it, and the material of the thing and everything, so it all fits in. So I wanted to ask one question about the cow reefs, which are so beautiful. And I was trying to figure out how close I can get to it when I'm on the stair, you know, because it looks so interesting to be able to see the material inside. I love seeing the recyclables, I'm recycled, you know, the garbage in there. So, so, you know, I just want to make sure I can see it, but I know you don't want people to touch it. And, you know, I didn't want to suggest what to do, but I mean, I think you've got.
I'm
great
open
ideas.
to any suggestions
Well,
that
I
you
was
may have.
wondering if one of them should go, since you said that, if one of them should be somewhere where somebody could actually see it, or, but
I
I don't
think-
want to take away from the beauty of the
Yeah,
spiral. So I just thought if somebody could really look closely, it would make it
I
even
think-
more, you know.
I
powerful.
could definitely talk to the team about that, where like perhaps we make an extra shell, like how you have this prototype in front of you. And next to the signage, there's an encasing
Mm,
of that
something.
shell so
Great
people
idea,
can
yeah.
see.
It just would be so. cool.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something, and I
So
appreciate that.
powerful. Yeah.
Can you, when you're at the top of those stairs, like, is that wall, I can't really tell from this rendering.
I would
Would-
say where this like painting is,
Mm,
that's
that's
how far it is. So you will be able to
You
see,
will, yeah.
you won't be able to touch it, which
Right.
I think is
No,
good.
that's good, yeah.
Um,
Because they're heavy, right? So you
Yeah.
don't want them to.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you always using recognizable materials like the Dixie cup and the spoon? Because that's part of it too, when you were
Yeah.
moving it the other way.
Mhm.
I couldn't tell what it was. I
Yeah.
just,
So
I
the
just saw that it created a
yeah.
beautiful color, and then I actually,
Some of the
Yeah,
shells
it's-
will face outward so you can see the material in it. And then some of the shells will kind of abstracted, which I want
yeah.
that part, that abstraction.
Yeah.
We did in the appendix, this was mentioned. Sorry, I'm like, all the slides. We had sent in a rendering, so, yeah. There we go. So in this rendering, because there was a question about seeing the material, we just gave an abstract rendering of like what it may look like from afar. And so you can see also in that rendering, when you look closely, that some of the shells, like the booty of the cowrie, will face out.
I think it's a question for you. Do you
Mhm.
want it to be recognizable, or do
Some
you just
parts
want
I
it to be
do.
subdued, right? Because these objects are so recognizable, once you know what they are, if you were to have the sample, then I think you could look up and say, oh, I get it now.
Yeah,
But I also don't think that's necessary if you don't want it to be. So it's more of a question of what are you actually embedding in there,
Yeah.
and something that actually, you know, people can tell what it is.
for myself, it is necessary. I think like sometimes I really wanted to make sure that although I am using abstraction in some of these designs, I want there to be recognizable symbols in each design. So I do think it is a important thing to acknowledge that some of them will face out, so you can see that material. But I don't want it to be like in your face, you know, I want the viewer to essentially like just one day be like, oh, I didn't realize these solo cups, or like maybe I need to look deeper at this. Yeah. Okay.
Carrie or Manuel, Bill?
No, my question was about the need for the recycled embedded plastic. I mean, it's historically key to I mean, I see that there were demonstrations in 1970 and also, but
Exactly.
I find the new piece beautiful, elegant. I'm not sure personally about embedded spoons in it myself, so that's just my take.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I think it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think it's a great project. It's beautiful. Really love the youth empowerment wall and how, youth, young kids were involved in the process of making it and coming up with the symbols and things like that also. And I think there's such a great teaching opportunity for the material processes for how these are made too, which I think makes sense in the context of a community center. So
Mm.
probably not in the scope of this specific project, but I think, maybe it's something for everyone to think about on the project too. Just how things are made. I think there's so much learning opportunity as well.
Yeah, I
Even
did.
for us here looking and say, "Oh, what is this?
Yeah.
How was this made?"
As an educator, and just thinking about the longevity of this project, it is expected to outlive all of us in the room. And so unless any of us have immortality. But I really want there to be conversation that continues where it's like, it can be class trips or it can be used in an art historical context. And just thinking on the archiving of our histories, we are in a crucial time in the United States where so many things are being taken out from our education systems. And specifically that of like Black, Brown, and Indigenous histories. And so thinking about that systemic erasure, and I want to make sure that this piece speaks to that for years on, and thinking on archiving our legacies and our histories.
There's a quick question.
Yes.
Just for Carrie mentioned it, when I was looking at the plastic solo shop and the plastic thing, I had my own interpretation of why it's there, but maybe it's different than what Carrie just. So I'm wondering, what is the history of that, or your giving that, or is it
It's
open
just,
to interpretation?
so as far as using upcycled plastic, so in the conceptual review or proposal, I spoke specifically to the history of Brownsville being first to receive budget cuts in sanitation. You had protests throughout different decades, et cetera. I am born and raised from East New York. I've always been adjacent to Brownsville. I've done so much in that community as well as like in my own community, just being a resident. And so we have no trash cans on our sidewalks. Maintenance is very low in our communities. And so it like strips away how people view us. Most times there's so many stereotypes that are placed on these communities, and it's very important to me to speak also outside of that community, but also on an international scale. When I was abroad, I was doing a Fulbright in Senegal, and I traveled to Casamance, Senegal. And it was interesting to me to see islands of trash and plastic. You have like these rivers, islands of trash. And so plastic waste is really destroying our waterways. We've had a lot of videos that have, in articles that have come up, seeing like fish that are at like the bottom of the ocean come up to the surface. And so we're in a really big climate crisis. But but you can see poverty-stricken neighborhoods have experienced long before the rest of the world has taken view to these situations. Thanks, Lori.
Okay.
Could I,
Oh, sorry,
And I'm-
please.
thank you for that explanation. I like the upcycled plastic in there, and I think you're giving a great example of making a perceived weakness about the neighborhood into a strength and uplifting. Could you go to the wall, the lobby wall?
The youth empowerment?
Yes,
Okay. Let's go.
yeah. And this is this isn't the final? or this-
No,
The final is,
well, this is close to the final. This is just like a 3D rendering.
yeah,
and you have the braid in front of you. And so we're working to see if I want the braid on this width or if I want it slightly smaller. But so far, this is the final layout of the design. The CNC milling, we are essentially paying for labor for the CNC milling. So we have some guidelines to limit it to 100 linear feet. So I've wanted to shift, making sure that it still is an example of the youth designs, but also working with making sure we're fitting in budget as well.
Yeah, I just think overall, what you've done here is so amazing, but the youth empowerment lobby remains my favorite aspect of it.
Thank you.
It just blew me away the first time, and
We'll talk about a personal piece outside of this. But yes.
okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you so
beautiful.
much.
It is.
Thank you.
Okay, so it just to, because I can take the last word here, Jasmine, you've done an amazing job of realizing your goal of making sure that the history of your community is illuminated and transformed by the beauty that you created here. And I really appreciate the text. I know I could hear when you were reading it, like a lot of love went into that, and really all of it. And particularly, I think the poem, which I did not recognize until you put the 4 parts together, is so beautiful. I mean, I almost want to read it out loud right now, but I won't. So wondering, my only comment really is like, will there be a way for people to kind of see those 4 lines together anywhere?
That is something that we could work on in the signage.
I mean, to me, that's entirely up to you as the artist, but I felt like I wouldn't necessarily understand that they go together, and it gives a kind of layer of like really beautiful narrative. It's connecting all the pieces that I think a lot of people, it would resonate with a lot of people who visit. So just something to think about. Like, I don't know where or exactly, but I'm sure you will.
Yeah, we could figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, with that, I will now take a roll call vote on item 29924, preliminary review of the installation of I Am Protected by Jasmine Hayes at the Brownsville Multi-Service Center and Community Hub. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Isabel Casilla? Approve. Lori Hawkinson?
Approved.
Bill Heinzen?
Proof.
Carrie Maloney?
Approved.
Manuel Miranda?
Approved.
Jimmy Van Bramer?
Of course, I approve. I just want to say it's really hard to feel good about the world these days. This
Totally agree.
this is a reason to be optimistic today and feel good about the world.
I also approve and agree completely with Jimmy. This is going to make the whole rest of my day better. And with that, we are approved. Congratulations and thank you,
Thank you
Jess.
so much, everyone, for your time.
Okay.
Testing, can you hear me?
Okay. The next public hearing item is item number 29925, preliminary review of the reconstruction of the Randall's Island Nature Center and adjacent site work at 1 Central Road, north of Hellgate Circle, east of the Wards Island wastewater treatment plant on Randall's Island, Manhattan. Per standard procedure, applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We will hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants. And we can now proceed with the presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Ann Wilson. I'm the Chief of Planning for the Randall's Island Park Alliance. Thank you very much for having us here today. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce the Alliance and the Randall's Island Park Nature Center project. So since 1992, the Alliance has worked in public-private partnership with the City of New York to develop, sustain, and program Randall's Island Park. We developed a master plan in partnership with the Parks Department in 1999 that was revised in 2007, and we've pretty much followed that master plan since. That came before the PDC back then, of course. Much of it has been accomplished. You can see some of it here, including more than 60 renovated fields, a track and field center, a tennis center, waterfront pathways, an urban farm, and restored natural areas. And the plan also included renovation of an existing parks building right at the heart of the island as an educational nature center. And that's shown right here in red. This very central and visible building currently holds our sports fields crew who are going to be moved elsewhere. It's actually a little confusing because the building is so central and welcoming that people try to visit our fields crew. Next slide, please. This diagram was put together specifically to emphasize the centrality and accessibility of the Nature Center. The building is adjacent to the park's roadways and parking lots, as well as public bus stops, and is especially accessible via the island-wide bicycle and pedestrian pathway system. And you can see under the arches of the Hellgate Bridge, the Hellgate pathway runs along the north-south axis of the park and makes it especially accessible via bicycle and pedestrian routes. The new Nature Center represents the catalytic first phase of activation of the site. It will take advantage of and help RIPA educate visitors about the adjacent salt marsh and freshwater wetlands. They were restored in 2008 and form the center of our waterfront stewardship environmental programming, serving thousands of students each year in partnership with public schools, mostly coming from East Harlem and the South Bronx. So you can see the salt marsh here and the freshwater wetlands in here. This new nature center will really foreground both of those resources, and the freshwater wetland especially is a non-point source pollution filtration mechanism, naturally filtering stormwater that comes in from the adjacent fields and roadways, and it's something that is a wonderful teaching tool, which the Nature Center will, to which the Nature Center will bring additional visibility and attention. The next phase, the center will also host volunteer events, free public events, and programs in tandem with our urban farm, which is an easy walk just south under the Hellgate footbridge, Hellgate trestle. The next phase envisions further activation of the site across the road with access pathways, additional parking, and a salt marsh viewing platform. So you can see the Nature Center, and then you can see some of our plans for future phases to activate the area between the two marshes and also adjacent to the Nature Center. Finally, I just wanted to point out that the access area along the roadway has been planned by MPFP alongside DDC plans for roadway reconstruction. So those have been coordinated carefully. So unless there are any further questions, I would now want to hand this over. Oh, the last thing I guess I would say is that Randall's Island Park Alliance raised the funds for this nature center. So we work in public-private partnership with the Parks Department, but we raised the funds for this long-awaited nature center. So with me now is Mike Barnacle from MPFP, and MPFP actually did our 2007 master plan. So Mike and I have known each other for a little while,
Yes.
and he will now take you through, unless you have any further questions for me.
So the original master plan, I think, actually started in 2002. So we've been working on this for quite a long time. And the original grant, I think, so everybody understands, was back in 2018, and it was really rehabbing this building. So the way, if you look at this building, it's a relatively tight footprint that we're working with. And we looked at really just redoing the roof in a scheme, right? So essentially we built outside of this building and put a simple roof over it and raised the glass to give you a feeling of a much bigger building. But the existing walls all remain. We're just encapsulating that with our new facade. So you can see the current condition. Right, so I want to just go to, sorry, I think it's easier to see in this view, right? So we essentially, those CMU walls still exist and are all enclosed, but we took the structure, built the structure around it and above it, keep the roof relatively simple, made it a green roof, and then essentially encapsulated the rest of those walls. As part of our grant, we had to leave those walls, so most of our windows line up with the original windows. We have made some small modifications. But adding that clear story is really where we think we're going to get the benefit of both the light and the space of the feeling of that. We also wanted to add the green roof and solar panels, but that's pretty much more of a discussion part of the programming with the Nature Center and the classroom talking about all those items. We have a relatively tight footprint, as we discussed. We're trying to get a lot of things going on in here. There's a lot of program, a lot of staff that have to be supported in the area on the left. We've worked out those little desks as tight as we can to get those staff and essentially provide bathrooms to the public as well as the staff in the classroom areas. We did want to open up the one side as much as we could. That's where we're not following kind of that original footprint. Have that glass open up so that classroom can come outside. We have a pergola for shade, and then eventually the natural resource group will be planting that with plants as well. I know it was just kind of a discussion or a request, kind of how we're building up the roof system. There you can kind of see how the structure itself actually sits outside of the original building, right? You see the columns and the thing and the roof sitting above it, right? And then essentially we're tying it to with the glass. Green roof, solar panels as well. We did look at some solar panels out in the landscape. We felt that it may become a nuisance for, things may happen to them. So we kind of isolated them up on the roof. We felt they were more secure there. So with the DVC plan, there was a discussion of having that bike route. We also thought it was an opportunity to enter as a drop-off. So there's not really parking per se for the public. That parking would come in the future parking under the bridge. But this would allow for the programmers, the golf carts and things like that for people to load up and go throughout the island. So the spots that are kind of shown there are really just for staff and, programming. But we did feel it was a good buffer. Currently, we have all those containers, and believe it or not, the containers have gotten hit from people making that turn. So we did want to keep trees and a buffer to keep the people in the public back from that. Also the bikers. Some of these paths, just so everybody knows, they exist now. We're just kind of helping them along. And we're going to work with the resource group and the planting as well. All native material. We brought a sample of the thermary. It's essentially a modified ash, and essentially aluminum trim would be the metal for the windows, the black flat mat, as well as the facade of the fascia. some concrete paving as well. And then some of the walkways would be gravel that we've worked with Parks on some other standards that they've used throughout the island. Same with the furnishings. Plant material, again, somewhat native, working with a resource group on the island. They're going to handle most of the planting themselves. We'll just assist in getting some of the procurement of it. I think that's it.
Thank you. Before we get into the discussion portion, I will see if we have any testimony. Chelsea, do we have anybody signed up for remote testimony?
We do not have anyone signed up for remote testimony. Is anyone within the Zoom room here to testify? If so, please use the raise hand feature. There are no hands, so we are okay to proceed. Thank you.
Seeing nobody in person, we can go into discussion.
Okay, commissioners? Lori?
Hi, I just had a quick question. Thanks for all your presentation. I think the whole grand plan is fantastic. Hope it all happens. So I had a question about and I apologize for not seeing this earlier because I was
Okay.
just looking carefully. The horizontal material wood.
Yep.
So just because I personally had a disaster doing that once. So just, how is this
Yeah, so
working?
then,
Because the water goes in and then it's a disaster, right?
right, so
I mean, how
we,
does that?
it's more of a
Normally
range-
it's vertical, just right.
right, so that we are, I believe, we went back to the horizontal. We had looked at it and the vertical application. There was some concerns with our waterproofing consultant.
Yeah.
But we are really looking at it as a rain screen essentially. So the building
Oh, so it
behind,
goes, okay.
exactly.
Great.
And that they're
I mean, I
open
love the way
joints,
horizontal
right?
looks, but
But,
it's,
yeah.
great. And this is the color, it's gonna be so dark or?
So it will,
It'll-
that's new. It will
Yeah.
age. The idea is that it's not treated with the
Look at
stain.
Decking, wait a minute,
No, that's the same wood though.
Oh,
It's
it's
the
the same.
ash, yeah.
it's the ash.
Yeah.
But you stained it or something.
No, it's thermally modified, so it
Oh.
makes it denser, right?
It's
But then
normally
over
light?
time, it will be
Yeah.
gray, right? It will
Okay.
gray over time.
Okay. And the
glue lamps,
yeah,
the glue lamps were gonna be stained to make it look closer to that because they won't be able to age like the other.
and how do you, maybe this is beyond the Call of Duty, how do you manage the thermal break when you go with the glue lamp from inside to outside?
That is a question I'd have to defer to our architect of
just like-
record. Yep,
Exclamation point question, because I also have a similar. I mean, I love when it happens,
Right.
or it's very difficult to accomplish.
right. So Ralph Forrest is our building envelope consultant. And that was one of the reasons we hired them, is
Yeah.
that is their forte. And that was our question was brought up very early.
Mhm.
How do we handle that in the energy code and the amount of glass? We had to balance that with the energy code
Well,
as
it's just
well.
that the wood going from inside,
No,
that's the
understood.
thermal break I'm
Yes.
talking about, not the glass, I know that.
Right.
Okay.
But I mean, just the overall energy code in that
Yeah,
thermal break.
You have yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. That's it. And the solar panels are on the little guy there.
We're on the little roof.
Yeah.
Correct. We did want some, there was
Yeah.
discussion about it. I think everybody wanted more green roof.
Mhm.
We're showing the green roof kind of just sedum, but we are going to introduce some other plants up there as well, just so it looks a little more native.
I think it's overall really, really wonderful and a great addition to the park and the island. The railings on the roof, do they serve no public safety purpose, right? That's not a publicly
Yeah. it's-
accessible roof.
Right. So it is really for maintenance, that if somebody has to go up there to do maintenance, there was discussion about having an OSHA cable, but you have to have proper harnesses on site. There was concerns that if those harnesses weren't on site, that this would allow anybody to go essentially through the hatch to maintain anything, if it's debris or whatever may be up there.
Well, I certainly want the workers to be safe.
Right.
I do think it detracts from the beauty of the building. I love the pitched roof. I love the green roof. But there's another image that you showed where it it's actually further in, and it looks like that one, like
Yeah.
security fencing, like a prison, the top of a prison wall or something. And I know that's not where you're going with this
No.
beautiful structure and roof. I guess I would just wonder if there's another way to accomplish this beautiful building, this beautiful sloping roof, without what I think is a visually distracting element up
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And I think part of what becomes distracting is the angled corners. They almost become an architectural expression in itself that is fighting a little bit with what is a very elegant architectural expression beneath. You mentioned the idea of maybe adding other plants that are not sedums.
Mhm.
I wonder if something taller, should you have the proper soil depth to support it, may distract a little bit, or like, not make it so present, let's say.
Yeah.
Another option I would say to consider is that OSHA does have a certain reach within its code. I wonder if there's an opportunity to put a planting bed outboard of the guardrail that you can still maintain from inside, like hands reach. But by having maybe taller grasses or something of more volume, you minimize the aesthetic of
At the
the
perimeter.
guardrail. And maybe bump up the aesthetic of the sustainable aspect of the building, which I think is great. And I was gonna ask before Jimmy asked if this was accessible, because I think as a learning center, being able to bring especially children up and see that
Mhm.
would be great. If you're not able to do that, I understand there's also operational things.
Yeah.
But maybe having, again, a little bit more landscape expression could be another opportunity to get to highlight the great things that this building's doing.
Okay.
I know you had a straight rail before.
Yes.
I mean, and the minimum, the height you have to have is,
42.
it does have to be 42. Yeah, so I mean, it's a code.
Right.
I mean, you have to, there's no way around it. But I think the suggestions of the landscape are a really great idea. I don't know if you can get it in there, but he would have to put an elevator
Right.
to the
Right.
roof
Yeah.
if we were to
Yeah.
make it
Yeah.
accessible. So there
And the
goes your
footprint
budget.
Within the building doesn't really. I don't
No,
think-
you can't
and
even have
then
a
we're on the
stair.
outside
If
and then- yeah.
anybody goes out, they have to have an elevator. So it's like
Right.
such a small building, it would be a nightmare for you
Well,
guys. So,
agreed. I mean,
but
we would love it as a learning thing, because I mean, that's what we want,
yeah,
but it just,
yeah,
I think
exactly.
we've even talked about having some of the drains, pipe plumbing being clear, so that the students can see the water flow and what's happening through that. So I mean, we're very much attentive to it.
Mhm.
It's just, I can't get anybody up there, you know?
So,
But I
but
think
if,
even just making the landscape a little bit
Sure.
more visible from beneath, it's a
Sure.
lot. And
Yeah.
also maybe choosing species that could be pollinators or
Yeah,
habitat
yes.
formers that can influence also the wetlands around it.
Mhm.
This being one of many stops for the species could be.
We did even
Great addition.
talk with the staff, potentially having beehives, right? But we don't know exactly that up there and how much maintenance and how much staff, but yes, it is certainly something looking into.
I mean, I was also wondering about a cistern, because if you wanted to show the
We have.
water,
We do have a system.
you have a cistern, so
Yes.
people could see the water
Yep.
comes, we gather it, it's here, and then if you would see I think that would all be wonderful.
Right, and
It's
that
a
was-
great, the whole thing is a great learning experience or
Right.
teaching opportunity. Great.
Actually, I just had a, oh,
Here's my problem about this. I think this project is. Here's my. Hello. Here's my problem. I think the building is great. I think the design is great. I can't get past that fence. When I look at this view, I've just always felt that fence is competing with the bridge and it loses. And the building, without it, you don't compete with it. So,
The railing.
The
Yeah,
railing.
Yeah,
sorry, the rail, not the fence. So I guess that's part of the problem is it looks like a fence. But is there any way to lessen the visual impact through materials? Is there anything?
well, certainly, as the
And I know
landscape
you have
architect,
made
we
some-
usually use plans to hide things we don't want to see, right? So I mean, I think the idea of introducing taller plant material up there could potentially help. We certainly can render that quick enough to take a look at that, right?
And what is the material right now? I see the black stanchions, but are you doing a cable mesh or
Correct. It's just cable lines.
just cable
right?
lines? Yeah.
And we actually, it's hard in the rendering because of the shadows. We actually changed it to the galvanized to make it
I
silver.
think the galvanized is gonna help it to disappear.
Right.
I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're doing the best job. It's really a killer. It's a
Yeah.
killer, because it's a small building, and you have to have that. I don't know what else they're gonna do. I mean, if they go straight up, it's gonna appear higher.
Right. And I do think that the input that we got from was very helpful. I'm gonna just find this. Tilting them back, and actually we brought it back another foot. Originally, we just
Yeah.
had a 2-foot paver. We moved it back another foot, but it is a tough thing. I mean, oh, there it is. So we did move this back another foot and brought those angles back to try to help that, and we did render it. Technically, it is galvanized in the model, but it's still with the shadows, you do see it. Yeah.
I just had a couple of comments about the signage.
Okay.
The main, kind of like building identification sign. So that one on the right, the text aligns to the right, which is a bit unconventional, like the convention would be aligning to the left, but also the entrance is to the left too. So just from a logical perspective, to me, it seems like that text should be aligning left. I don't know if there was another reason to align it to the right.
Okay.
And then, on the sides, it says Randall Island, I think, Randall
Right.
Island Park.
Right.
But the identifier is really for the building. I mean, that's maybe a minor point. You might have discussions internally about this, but that's something that I wonder why on the face it's called, the nature center, on the side refers to the entire area. And then the top of the sign, it looks like, the material doesn't continue to the top on some of the renderings.
Correct. It was thought that it was actually the metal plate had some relief from the structure below, so you see some of it as more metal. It's not a giant plate, right? The metal is kind of floating above it.
Oh, okay, so there's space on the very top.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
All right, okay. I guess for the view from above, which I guess maybe you don't see that as much. I'm not sure where you would see it from above, but just in the rendering, it
Yeah.
doesn't look like a full volume, but maybe that's okay to have it opening on the top too. And then the blade signs for the public, I mean, I think it's good to really, I think it's a really good looking building. But the blade signs, I think it's good to announce that there's a public restroom with such prominence, but, in this rendering, I don't know what the actual scale is. The blades feel very large.
Okay.
I'm not sure if
It's,
these two kind of like blade signs, if that's the person beneath it, that sign is probably 2 feet tall.
Mm.
Which, in space, I think will feel very big, but. so
okay.
Think about.
Yeah, I mean, I
that
think we
also.
had about 18, but yeah.
Oh, 18, okay.
Yeah. It was hard with the font, as you can imagine, right? Getting it big enough that you can see it from a distance
Mhm.
to very much a concern that we didn't want the general public always bothering the staff, right? And there's things
Mhm.
going on that people could clearly see, there's the restrooms and this is where I need to go.
Mhm, mhm. No, that makes
So it
sense,
was a
yeah.
little bit of a balance on that, right? And trying to be consistent with the font and the text type.
Mhm.
One last question on the fencing. The horizontal cords, is there any way to reduce the number of them?
The
I'm
spacing
guessing
really
no,
has
but-
to, no, yeah, and it has to
The
4
spacing
inch.
is,
yeah.
okay. Okay, cool. All right. So just to summarize, I think I'm in agreement that with my fellow commissioners, it's a really handsome building and it will be really like kind of a magical place, I think, for children who come there with school groups. Really excited that Randall's Island is finally getting an appropriate nature center. And just to summarize comments, obviously, we talked a lot about the roof fence, which there's nothing that can be done about that. You have to have the fence, but to consider the possibility that the plant mix for the roof could be skewing taller.
Mhm.
If we can manage that, and even looking at the possibility of possibly like increasing soil depth on the edge for that.
Right.
We also talked a little bit about the thermal break for the GluLam members and just something to keep in mind, which you are
Yes.
already doing. And then the signage, just looking at consistency in the naming of like, what is this place and making sure it's consistent across the signage. So with that, commissioners, we'll now take a roll call vote on item number 29925, preliminary review of the reconstruction of the Randall's Island Nature Center and adjacent site work in Randall's Island, Manhattan. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Isabel Casilla,
Approve.
Lori Hawkinson, Bill Heinzen,
Approve.
Carrie Maloney, Manuel Miranda, Jimmy Van Bramer.
Approve.
And I also approve, right? And Lori approves. So let the record show we have unanimous approval on the design for the Randall's Island Park Nature Center. Thank you and
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. The next public hearing item is item number 29926, preliminary review of the installation of facade graphics for a stadium as part of phase 2 of Willets Point between 30.
Can everybody hear us? Are we unmuted?
Should I start over?
Yes.
Okay, starting over. The next public hearing item is item number 29926, preliminary review of the installation of facade graphics for a stadium as part of phase 2 of Willets Point between 38th Avenue and 35th Avenue in Corona, Queens. Per standard procedure, applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We will hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants. And we can now proceed. Welcome,
Right.
Gail.
Good afternoon, commissioners and members of the community. I'm Gail Rothstein from EDC. Your presenters today are Rashid Singabi of HOK Architecture, Matt McInerney, HOK Experience Design, and Kylie Wyatt from the New York City Football Club. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for your time today. It's good to be back and good to see everyone again. We are honored to be back here to present to you some advancements on the design. As a reminder, when the exterior design received its approval in September of 2024, we had 4 major walls that carried placeholder graphics. And we are back here today to present to you the progress on the proposed designs for the 4 NYCFC branded graphic walls, and we've been calling these the landmark walls. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce and pass it on to my colleague and partner, Matt McInerney, our graphic design lead on the project.
Thanks.
Matt, go ahead.
Rashid, thank you very much, and good afternoon. As Rashid mentioned, my name is Matt McInerney. I'm a design leader with the Experience Design Group at HOK, and we've had the good fortune of being a part of this project from the competition phase. And Rashid and I have been able to work on this from the beginning. And then we've also been working hand in hand with NYCFC's branding and marketing group. And it's been a year and change, maybe 2 years now, that we've been working together. And we're excited to share these stories and how we've got to this point today. And really what I wanted to start with is the general philosophy that the design team started to work with. And that's really thinking about how we start to take on these landmarks. And from an architectural standpoint, they're very important. They're going to have a long life. And so we've been approaching it from the idea that basically we're going to be telling these stories and we're going to be using the brand. Oh, no problem. I was like, great. Perfect. And so basically we wanted to use the NYCFC brand as a guide to where we're heading, but we didn't want to get too specific about how we're using that brand. So the idea here is that we are referencing the brand, but we're keeping it broad enough to have more of a larger appeal when it comes down to what the messages are. So quickly, I'll just flip through here just to share and bring everyone up to speed. So the first landmark is in the northwest corner, and it faces the freeway. And that's where we're proposing letter forms that say New York City. And then the second is on the side of the cube, and that's where we're proposing the monogram. So, and these are both two almost timeless portions of this new brand, and it really starts to speak to the civic nature of the stadium because the stadium belongs to the city. And then as we move around to the east side, we've got number 3, which is the southeast gate wall, where we're representing the city, and that is through the imagery of the pigeon and multiple pigeons. And then number 4 is it's the supporters entrance, and that's where we're bringing in the flags, sometimes multiple flags when it comes to the concepts. But the idea that is exactly where supporters will enter, and that's where the action happens in the symbology of the game. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kylie, and she's going to talk about some of the symbolism and how we got there.
Yeah. So first off, we have the cube wall, which has the club, which is the monogram, the NYC. It's literally the center of our brand and also figuratively. Then we have the northwest corner, which is that New York City word mark that utilizes letter forms that's similar to what you see in the badge. You know, the city is large also as well because city is a shorthand for our team name. So as it wraps around, you get just a really big city. And then on the southeast wall, we have the pigeons. So the pigeon is a really funny story. Our fan here, Amari, from the beginning, just showed up with this pigeon mask, and it kind of became like an unofficial mascot that the fans really seem to love throughout the years. So you can see some of the executions we've done in scarves and retail. That's like what we call a jock tag on our jersey. It's really taken on a life of its own, and we've really had a lot of fun with it and seeing it come up in different ways. So. And then the northeast wall has that waving flag, right? Soccer culture is so special in the fact that there's lots of drums and flags and banners. Like you don't really see that at like a football game, right? So to have that symbolism and to also have a nod to our fans, which is, you know, they've supported us for 10 years now, which is incredible. We just feel that that's really special to highlight the fact that this stadium is, you know, for the city, yes, but also like it's here because of the fans and the soccer and the people. So here we have some applications of some of our branding elements like the mosaic here. You can see how we lay that in over things like logos, icons, photography, illustrations. And then here we have some of our custom lockups that we've done for some of our sub-branding assets. We really let the brands kind of flex and move on the applications, right? Like Kids Night, it's fun. It looks like a child drew it. It's in our typeface. This is where we kind of break the rules a little bit. And I say break the rules, but you know, the brand guidelines are a structure, the guidelines for how we create visuals that really represent this brand.
And Matt, can we go back a couple of slides to the key plan?
This one.
Yes, yeah, and just as a reminder for everyone, this key plan, I think we've been submitting this since last June, I believe. It has evolved in conversations as we started to break down the hierarchy and distribution of those art canvases around the stadium. And as you can see, number one, the brand signage, that's what we're here for today. 1, 2, 3, and 4 in yellow, the landmarks. They're meant to refer and reflect the club's brand in a civic manner. So it's not too exclusive to the club, but it's also belonging to the city. And that's reflected most perhaps on 1 and 2, where we have the majority of the traffic of pedestrians arriving from both sides into the stadium. Number 2, the purple dashes around the stadium, those are temporary fan-based stadium messaging. Those are meant to change seasonally. They're canvases for sponsors and whatnot that will continue to evolve every season of soccer. And number 3, which is dashes 6 and 7 here, those are the walls that have been dedicated to the EDC sponsored art program. Now we can go to the
material.
To ahead. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, sir.
Of course.
Now, a big portion of the exterior facade on the stadium is made out of precast panels, and those precast panels are sometimes exposed to express the nature of the concrete, and sometimes they are cladded with the brick paneling, and the brick is a big part of the identity of the stadium, and those are going to be brick panels that are poured into concrete molds. For the actual application of the art, and I know that we had this image before and there was a comment for us to supply the samples, we have these samples here that show 2 different types of treatments. One here, both of them have the Fairface concrete on the outside that will be a sandblasted, light sandblasted face of concrete. And the recesses are meant to be recessed in 2 grades. One that expose more of the dark gray aggregate on the inside, and one that is meant to lightly express the aggregate, but not as much. So this is here as a lighter treatment. This is here as a darker treatment. And the darker treatment is they're meant to express hierarchy. The darker recess here will express the hero component of the art, as Matt's going to walk us through now. And the lighter aggregate exposed is meant to express the secondary or the supporting component into in the artwork. And relying on the recesses, these are 3/4 inch recesses that will change with the position of the sun and lighting. So we're also expressing a shadow line over these as well. And you can go to the next slide. So this here again reflects it. If this is a sample of the artwork, the darker aggregate will express the main art component. The lighter aggregate, the lighter recessed form will express the secondary component of the art here. And the secondary component here, we have been working on integrating the brick architecture of the building in an abstract form to bridge between brand and architecture on those landmark walls. And in some cases, the parametric pattern or abstracted pattern of brick represents the sky and the cloud. In some cases, they represent the fan and the noise and the stands, as we're going to see on the supporters wall. And in some cases, they represent the ashes rising from the valley, as we're going to see on the northwest corner.
And so I'm going to go ahead and start working my way around the building and just share some bits about each one of these canvases. This is that northwest corner, faces the freeway again. And just so you can kind of understand the lay of this layout, we're going to take a look at the location. We're going to look at a previous design, and then these are kind of the active new elements that we're addressing today. And so, as Rashad had mentioned, and I had mentioned before, we're really keeping both of these in a more civic tone when it comes to the brand itself. The entire way we've been looking at this is keeping these elements as evergreen as possible, so they have a long lifespan and they can change and alter as the brand changes and alters. Because as we know, logos get redesigned, they will change. And so we are starting to seek out elements that will work no matter what with the ethos and the philosophy of the team. And so this is one of those. By removing the FC from it, it really becomes about the place while it's still representing the club. This was some of our inspiration from the new brand identity. And we really loved this. We thought it was great. And we wanted to we started to look at it actually in the mix on that particular layout, but the nature of the typeface, it's condensed, it's narrow, and it wouldn't really fit in a clean way and represent city the way we really wanted to represent the word city. So that's when we started to look at the secondary typeface, which is still part of the brand, but at the same time, it starts to differentiate a little bit and deviate from the main brand elements. And then also it's much more legible from a distance. So that was another reason behind this. And so we're starting to look at now how this starts to lay out in a larger elevation. You can see that parametric brick pattern that Rashid had mentioned, and it starts at that pedestrian level. So you have that kind of tactile experience when you're walking right up next to it. But as you go across the street and pull back, you can really start to see these large scale messages and how they start to manifest themselves.
And the sections here, they express where we are expecting for these recesses to happen. So for instance, section A up here, this will cut through a panel like this, so it will expose the darker aggregate. Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. Thank you.
So he doesn't have to keep picking them up.
Yes, yes, and I hate to scratch the table from the concrete too, but
Right.
yes, that's a good idea. So, yeah. So the darker contrast here, this will be applied to where the lettering is for this to read a little more clearer with higher contrast than the abstracted brick, which will inherit the lesser aggregate exposure. They're both going to have a on the left is what's the background piece. On the right, the darker one is the text.
It's very different with the rendering than actually.
Right, the colored rendering at the end of the deck might show this a little better. This is meant to be a technical drawing that does not necessarily express the colors here.
Laura, could you repeat?
Oh, sorry. I just said, if you squint your eyes, which is like being further away, they look very similar in value.
Yeah, I agree. There is a subtlety to them in terms of how much we're exposing here. This is not washing out the concrete as much, and we can work on making this a little lesser. The idea, yeah.
If that's what you're trying to get, then I guess we should look at the later rendering.
Okay, sounds good. So again, the sections express where the recesses happen, and then based on whether it's the location 1 is meant to be the exposed recessed aggregate, location 2 is the recessed form that's not exposing as much as the aggregate, and location 3 is the smooth fair face finish. And that will be a consistent pattern throughout the rest of the drawings.
Just to clarify, 2 and 3 are together. They're not like separate areas, right?
Right, yeah, they're just a matter of like 2 is when we're cutting in a section that
Right,
is going to expose
what
the
you're calling the
lighter aspect.
mosaic.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the lower level, and then 3 is the ground face level.
Right,
Okay,
right.
sorry.
So anywhere there is ground face, anywhere there is a fair face, it's 3. Yes, yeah.
And now we'll move on to the monogram. This is number 2 right here. And we're looking at just the pure monogram. And there was a reason we originally started to talk about the full badge. But again, that idea of moving away from the full-blown expression of the badge at this moment in time, we felt that the monogram, it does multiple things. It starts to move away from this specific expression of the brand by this specific agency, and allows the monogram to represent the city again, but also represent the team and the club. And so now, as Rashid mentioned before, 60% of folks are going to be coming on this, coming to the stadium on that west side. And so this is, again, that you can see this is visible from the train. And this is going to be an expression that really starts to be that civic-minded element as we start to think about those two corners. And that moves us around the building, and now we're on the west side. And we can see the previous design that we had submitted before. And we had taken in the comments from the group and really started to look back at all of the elements and really start to investigate what they were doing and how could we start to A, simplify the design, and B, really start to bring it more in line with the flag wall that you'll see in a moment. So we started to really, again, take in the comments that we had heard and started to do, these are quick sketches that were based on this after we had received those initial comments. And we started to look at different versions. Do we continue to have a hero bird and then 5 birds that represent each of the 5 boroughs? Do we continue to do that? Do we remove that skyline? And so we started to really investigate this, and how do we start to bring in that pattern and that brick pattern into the mix?
And one thing, just to echo Matt, we truly appreciate the comments that come from the commission. They continue to allow us to do better. And as we've taken a second look and worked on these, we think we're heading in a better direction that's evolving this art here. And we're happy to continue to develop this further.
And so this starts to show, this is the sketch again, but enlarged. So you really start to see just the simplification of the bird and how it starts to play out in this large scale mix. Again, thinking about this pedestrian level experience and bringing in this texture that starts to represent the smoke and clouds, and really just kind of aspirational just alignment with the architecture. So that was the other thing, is we started to really think about how does the architecture influence the art, and how does the art influence the architecture in some way, shape, or form. And then a side note that we haven't really mentioned too much, this is a corner. So this is the mural, the corner turns and you go into the entrance. And so it really starts to become directional and almost a wayfinding element as well. Large scale, believe me, but it's just kind of a nod to let you know where you're going. And then the flag does the opposite. It starts to like lean in toward the entrance and starts to show you where to head as well. This is where this pigeon wall lives. On the left, right there. Oh, number 3, yes. So this starts to set up like almost like a diptych, kind of like two. It is the east side of the building.
Who comes in that side again? I'm trying to remember. Special people or something.
On this particular, the next corner, that's the supporters entrance right here. And this is East Club entrance.
There's around 75% of the population will arrive from the southwest corner, from the 7 train and transportation there towards the cube. Some of them might not choose to go from the cube, and they will go towards their seating section, and that will distribute them to these 2 entries here on the east side. Where this pigeon entry is on the third, number 3 here, there is an east concourse entry that climbs up to this point, and under it, right here at this wall, this is a lobby to what we call the East Club, which is basically like a glorified food hall for like maybe a little bit of an upgraded ticket. So essentially, these are door markers.
Mm-hmm.
Both. You're coming in through the corner up and arriving to face these 2 pigeons here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's hence the graphics here are shifted up. People are going to be climbing up, standing right here to see this when they're going up this staircase here. And then there is another group of people that are going to be going through these 2 doors underneath, right next to this wall as it turns the corner.
Why don't you complete your
Sure.
presentation?
Yep, absolutely.
and then-
Yes.
Okay, and so I can make this brief. So this is the supporters entrance. This is where fans, but I'll bet they'll come through the cube no matter what on day 1. And then after this, they'll start to probably just come here. And this is really for them. And this is the previous design that we had shown before. Again, we took notes from the group and really started to look at simplifying the flag, and we worked with branding and marketing on that piece too. And so we started to show it in a way that started to be a little more realistic in the fact that here, this is a little bit more stylized. It's got many folds. It's not really moving that monogram around a lot. So we started to investigate this idea of it's getting cropped almost by what you're not seeing. And so we worked through those elements, but then we also started to work on these background elements as well. And we started to look at a simplified flag, a flag with maybe a little bit of a break in it to start to tie it in a little bit more with the pigeon. But then we also were investigating what if it just became the brick, or what if we went ahead and added that cornerstone element to bring this level of information to that wall. And so we ended up working with NYCFC, and we kind of landed on this being kind of the approach to share with you all at this time. So, and it starts to really, when we look at what we had before and all of the elements that we had submitted before, you can start to see there are some things that are like, okay, that definitely is on its own wavelength. That's on its own wavelength. And when we started to investigate this based on your comments, it got better. It started to improve. It became more of a family, and this is where we ended up landing. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. I just want to see if we have any testimony. Chelsea, do we have anybody signed up for remote testimony?
We do not have anyone signed up for remote testimony. Is anyone within the Zoom room here to testify? If so, please use the raised hand feature. There are no hands, so we are okay to proceed. Thank you.
Nobody else is here in person, so we're okay to proceed.
Thanks, Yoshi. Okay, commissioners, any comments, Manuel?
Sure. Actually, I don't know, maybe I'd be curious first to hear, Jimmy's responses, just because it's such a huge Queens project, maybe putting it in that context first, and then we can talk about the details.
Thank you. So let me just start by saying, I think this is great for Queens and New York City. And I've only been to one game at the horrible Yankee Stadium. So I'm really glad that you're coming home to Queens. Having said that, and I really appreciate all the work that you all have done, and there are other people who will be much more expert at the technique and what you're doing here. But and I know there's always a push and pull, right, between being a New York City sports team and having your home in Queens, right? And your neighbors just across the street, right, work with it. But I feel like you're in Corona, right? You're in the shadows of Flushing. You're right next to East Elmhurst, right? You've got the 7 train. And while you're always going to be New York City's football club, and that's your brand, and that's, and you're called City. I get that in the football world. I feel like there's not enough of even sort of a nod to Queens, because while you're New York City's football club, your home is in Queens. You'll have a big fan base in Queens. I think you all know that too. And so I feel like that's missing. Is a little bit more of like, you're looking out to the neighborhood, and there'll be a new neighborhood literally built right around you too, right? Thousands of units of housing. So I wonder if you could address that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I was gonna try to set you up with that, and basically,
Yes.
Well, I think we have had a lot of internal discussion about that, as you might imagine, and we kept coming back to the idea that the architecture was really expressing the industrial nature of the neighborhood, and so we used that as kind of our guiding light, which might not be enough for some. And I understand that for sure. But then the other side of that conversation was this becoming an icon in and of itself. And so, because there was discussion about, do we put some sort of, a Queens-based icon into the mix, Unisphere, things like that. But we also felt that this was powerful enough to stand on its own and become a Queens icon. So that was some of the thinking behind it. And I'm not an architect. So I'm going to pass it to the architect.
No, that covers perfectly. And I think the landmarks are part of the story. They're not the story on its own. So a lot of the areas that as soon as you set foot in the stadium and the community spaces on City Square on the south side, these are modeled after things like the Queens Night Market, and they're embracing graphics to represent the placemaking in the area. And so there are almost like pieces to the puzzles that when they come together, that it blends the new icon that can stand on its own, plus gives the nod to Queens without being completely in the shadows of the Queens identity only. When we looked at the stadium as a massive component in the very elegant sequence of sports venues that are right there along the Flushing Meadows Park, starting with the actual park, the Queens Museum, the tennis complex, going up to City Field and crossing the Passerelle. And each one of these is quite unique on its own. And if we're going to add yet the next link in that chain, how can we do it that it can give that nod, but also stand unique on its own? So I think there's that delicate balance that we're trying to achieve.
Right.
And this is one of those components.
I appreciate that. And
balance.
I'll say a few things. One, there's no such thing as being in the shadow of Queens, right? This is your home, and you should be really proud of being in Queens, and Queens will love you for it. I just to get specific. So there was I thought one of the monument walls had sort of a cityscape. Is that still in the plan, or did you take that out altogether?
Well, as of now, we've been thinking about taking it out for a reason. I think less is more in this situation. At some point, we were showing the cityscape here, and for any eye, this is Manhattan more than Queens.
Which is exactly what I was going to say.
Right.
Yes.
We've all seen that a million times in a million different ways, and it never speaks to Queens, right?
Agreed. Right. I completely agree.
What's that? The aspiration should be to move to Queens.
Right.
But so I was going to say, if you did a cityscape like that, then that would be the place to include the Unisphere or something that was very, very identified in Queens. That was a nod. The other thing I'll just add, the Mets did the City Connect jerseys last year. I don't know if you followed that debate, right? And they chose to put NYC on the front of the jersey, which was very controversial to a lot of us who love Queens, because you're like, why couldn't they have done Queens? I understand why they didn't do Queens, right? Because they're New York City's team and they're even beyond New York City. But what they did do in that uniform, right, were all these slight touches which were nods to Queens, including using the color purple, right, as an outline, as a nod to the 7 train, right, which is where everyone was coming, or a lot of us coming. And so I wonder if there's other things that you could do. I don't have an answer for it, but I appreciate the tee up from Manuel, just because I do think that's missing from what is a grand project. I think you'll be iconic on your own. I think the stadium will become a Queens landmark, but Corona, Flushing, right, Flushing Meadows Park, they're all just so central to you, and you are to them, and so there should be some kind of marriage there.
Thank you. I appreciate this thought.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of get the context, because a lot of this is imagery and, messaging. It's not really functional in a lot of ways, I think. So I think having that context, in this kind of brand discussion is important. But I'll just give my comments, just starting like in the top left. I think that NYC logo, I know that's the icon or the logo for the club, and I think it it references like the token. It says NYC, so it's very clear what that is, and that's, for me, it works as a kind of symbol. And thinking of this, I mean, this is a massive scale. It's like 40 feet tall. It's in concrete. I think it works as an icon, as in a landmark. And I think the other thing to think about too is that there's this other text around it, like whatever the name of the stadium is going to be. So I think that all goes together. And I think that kind of there's a screen or a banner that has like the NYC FC logo in it. The one on the left. So I think there's a good hierarchy here of like the symbol, the kind of like wayfinding and the marketing together, and it all seems to work. When you go to New York City, for me here it breaks. The typeface, is somewhat, if you look at even just the terminals, like the end of the letter C, it's horizontal in the symbol. it's vertical, on the word city. So I think, for things that are this large, I just think there needs to be some, visual consistency because there's a lot of investment going into this. I think the spacing of the word city too, like the letters themselves, like there's just too much, this is just, kerning, like letter spacing. There's too much space between like the letter C and the letter I in relation to like, the I and then the overlapping spacing between the T and Y. So, I just think that needs to be closed up. For me, the typeface too, again, like the terminals, like, this looks like maybe copper plate, or you said it's a secondary typeface, but it just feels like not part of the family. For me, I don't actually mind the, the kind of new brand logo, whatever it was, like the condensed typeface. I think that's like a really well done typeface, but even that, again, terminals that are an angle. So I think you kind of like want to reverse, reduce your language. So this to me is, it feels like outside of the family, I think. The bottom left, the pigeon, I think it's good without the city. I think there are a number of connotations to having like the New York City skyline, that could change over time, et cetera. So I think, and also if this is about branding and symbols, I think just having the bird there makes sense. I'm not sure that this drawing of the pigeon, this is totally vague, but it's not there yet for me, at least. Like it still feels a bit clip arty, a bit like an illustration. It doesn't feel like a brand expression to me, really. The kind of pattern of the smoke in the background, I don't think you need to know the story for that. It's a nice reference, but just the patterning, I think, for me works, as a architectural elements. And then the flag, again, I think it's cleaner if there's just one. And then with the NYC logo being chopped like that, I think you can only really do that if that logo is super recognizable. I don't know if it is or not. I'm not like a huge fan of soccer, but like logos like the MTV logo, I think they did that in their branding, like they chopped it up, or there are a few other examples. So I'm not sure if this, logo is that recognizable yet. Does it have the brand equity in with which you can like distort this symbol? So I think about that too. And again, I think the rendering of the flag itself, is it there yet as just a drawing that's going to be, engraved in concrete and, essentially will be there throughout the life of the building. Like you can't replace this really once it's done. So I think the quality of the drawing, I think it needs, more iterations. I think, there was a, current TV, it was like Al Gore's like television station. Their logo had like a flag and like a distorted kind of like, name, but that was text. And this is kind of text, but kind of a symbol. So that might be a good reference to look at how like it's distorted with this flag. Yeah, those are my comments.
Fair enough.
Anyone else? Comments?
Yeah, I would like to add a couple. I agree 100%, Manuel, with what you said, and specifically the word city is the one that reads to me the most generic in the sense that I'm not able to tie the typeface to a brand. And because it's the word city, which is also kind of a very general word, it just lacks the, I would say, the strength that some of the other ones do. But I wanted to address tectonics a little bit, just to understand further how you're thinking of it. As Laurie mentioned, if you squint your eyes, you can't quite tell the difference that strongly out of the two finishes. But at the same time, the two finishes are not, they're not superimposed with each other, right? The lighter one is kind of that brick pattern. The darker one is the figure. So they don't need to be that distinguished from each other if you don't want them to be, but these renderings make them feel like they do, right? The dark pigeon particularly reads so much darker in that in your rendering than the material does. I think it's more of a question for you. Is your goal the material sample, or is your goal the rendering? Because they're not quite there.
Isabel, that's a wonderful question. And I think it actually is taking some work on our part, working with the precast concrete people to see what is achievable without having to break the bank also. So I think right now we're at the point where they are pouring some mock-ups and advanced samples that can allow us to bring down, like to basically bring closer our intent with how it's expressed on the render and how it's actually going to be built. So I would say that this is maybe one step right before we re-render these in our next submission to show you a clear representation of how this color exactly is going to be and how this color exactly is going to be. from an intent standpoint, the intention is to have the hero component of each graphic stand out a little more than the supporting role of the pattern behind.
Yeah.
And that's where we can play with a couple of things, texture and depth.
Mhm.
The depth, we, from a technical standpoint, to be able to apply the retarding method, we need the 3/4 of an inch depth for both of them. So that kind of limits us to the 3/4 of an inch depth here without having to change a wall type to make it thicker, to achieve deeper recesses for these. So we're limited a little bit to the color that we can expose. And understanding that an aggregate can actually have a blend of white pebbles, yellow pebbles, and gray, we're really pushing on the precast concrete folks to please make it the majority gray. We don't want a yellow pebble in there. We don't want a white pebble in there. But what they can control is how much of the retarder they can apply. Hence, this at least shows relatively a little more exposure. And I have an image that I'll share right now, if you don't mind. And this one would expose less of the aggregate. That's the only constraint we can do. Now, in refining these drawings in our next phase, what we will do is we will try to not have overlaps between the brick module and the pigeon, so they're not melting on one another, and just allow just some visual separation between both, also to help us accentuate that hierarchy.
That makes sense. I mean, I don't know your budget, obviously, but in other occasions where I try to achieve a similar contrast, we add either like a mica or a crushed granite to the aggregate just to bring up that extra darkness, which a standard aggregate doesn't have. There's also the possibility of a tint, although I don't know how the tint works with just one monolithic pour.
Right.
If there's something that could be added after the fact,
Yeah.
that's another thought, but I know you're exploring. I think it's more of
Yeah.
of an idea of clarifying the intent, right? Because I don't think the materials and the renderings are speaking to each other. The last thing I wanted to say, which you started alluding to with the 3/4 inch recess, is I'm not sure how when the image turns the corner, that little bit on the flag or that little bit on the pigeon, would that recess in a way distract the clarity of the drawing?
Right.
Because what's turning is so small.
Right.
So I wonder if you're gonna do physical mock-ups to understand that.
We are.
Should it be a much bigger graphic turning so you actually understand that continuity? Or are you getting lack of clarity with the turning and should it not turn? It's kind of like straddling right now.
That's really
That's it.
I just wanted to mention about also the, when you're doing the different tests, because they will give you tests where they're right next to each other and not recessed. So you could then see, because when they get close, it would be nicer to see, a number of these together, and maybe you have that already, the values that you can get through the different aggregate and the amount of pressure that's
yeah,
applied.
how much
Yes.
of it is
So
exposed.
we're just seeing two in a variety of a number, I know, right? And so, and I agree, it's not really representing, that image is not representing what we're seeing here in terms of that background, so.
Yeah, there's one last technique, probably costly, but it is to broadcast aggregate after you've exposed it with the retardant. So when you expose the retardant, you're exposing the aggregate that's integral to the mix and you don't have a lot of control, but then you can broadcast an additional to that, and that will make
Apply
it,
it later,
exactly,
yes.
apply it later, and that will make it denser and a little more.
I mean,
controlled.
one more point is that these are precast panels. Where are your joints? Because panels can be huge.
Right.
So where are these just
They're-
horizontal or?
They're
you-
starting to be expressed here. We have 3 rows of precast panels, and these are going to be just around 20-ish feet long, by around 8 feet. I can't
So
remember the
8 is,
exact
I
numbers.
guess it has to go on a truck, so.
Right.
But the reveal or whatever you're doing at the joint,
There will be just a 3/4 inch joint, but it's not going to be an expressed revealed, but it will be there. I think it's just part of the panelization of it.
yeah. Okay.
And you can see some of them expressed here. The technical drawings will show these in detail as well. And I think they might be appearing on the elevations, but that should reflect more clearly on our next submission.
Because when we're seeing a rendering, we don't care about the trees and everything,
Right.
right? We really just want to see the thing you're working on.
Absolutely.
That's.
Absolutely.
We know you're working.
Absolutely.
Thank
We're
you.
all
Yes.
working.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bill.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, good. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you.
Bill.
I, I just wanted to echo Commissioner Miranda's comments, all of which I support. And on the flag, I think it may just be this rendering, but to have the field or the icon split like that results in a odd geometrical shape. And so it's a large flag overpowering another flag, the dark background, and with some symbol that I think presents as overpowering in a bad way and not a good way, not a celebratory way. And I think that would be alleviated by having the full icon visible and maybe taking out the smaller flag or adding either adding more flags or taking out the smaller flag.
Right.
Thank you.
These are great impressions because we're kind of crowdsourcing how people will feel about it. Totally. It's coming from the eyes of the professionals.
Yeah.
These are great impressions. Manuel, just to comment on this a little bit, Matt and we went back and forth on this a few times, understanding that there was a previous version of flag that had the full logo on it. And I know that there was a comment that came, it's like, how realistic is the geometry of the flag?
Right.
And that sort of lit a bulb. It's okay, well, if the flag needs to be realistic, the logo that's applied on it needs to ride that wave. But I think your comment on reconsidering that geometry to be able to accentuate the logo clearly and have the flag appear realistically is that next layer that we can fine tune for sure.
And to your other points as well, while we're fine tuning that, fine tuning. I mean, that's what it's all, that we will letter space, we will kern for all the way up to the last possible second. I don't know. That's how we will do it. But we will also then give consideration to that other face as well and kind of just see. I mean, we started looking at it in the first go. And so we can take all of these comments and go back and really start to kind of tweak and tighten.
Okay. I'm going to thank you for that presentation and thank you for it's been a pleasure working with your team. I feel like we're having a real conversation, which is we appreciate very much. I will summarize the comments that my fellow commissioners have made, but for myself, I just wanted to mention with the pigeon, I agree with all the comments made. I'll summarize them. The pigeon, I'm just wanting to offer the idea that a heroic pigeon is maybe a little bit inauthentic in the sense that they're heroic in their kind of scrappiness and survival. But the position of this and that kind of profile of that bird to me is, yes, as a New Yorker, the silhouette of the head, but I'm just wondering if someone who isn't as urban, a city dweller might not even know what bird it is because we're not accustomed to thinking about that kind of heroic position for a pigeon. Like they're funny in a certain way and scrappy, but heroic, I'm not sure. So I'm wondering if maybe some other like humor or some other aspect of pigeons could unlock that one. Cause it seems like, to me, that's like the position you expect to see like an eagle in.
Sure.
Or a hawk, like not a pigeon.
And to your point, that is exactly where it started to head to, like, we were talking about this idea of a promise kept and this idea of the stadium being built in NYC.
Yeah.
And so that's where we started to maybe write in some nobility into the story, into the narrative a little bit. And that's how we ended up kind of, and we loved the idea of the design team loved the idea of having one pigeon that represented all of New York, and then having these 5 start to kind of be like, yes, but we're also individuals.
Yeah.
We've got this.
No, I get it.
So, but your point is taken.
Yeah, I just think, I just wonder, like, maybe they're just not that heroic. I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's their unofficial mascot. Oh, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Oh, you need the microphone.
Oh, sorry. I forgot about this. No, sometimes we are actually like referenced on broadcasts and stuff as the pigeons. So it's, personally not my favorite thing to be called, but the fans love it. It really is like, again, unofficial mascot of the team. And it's really becoming.
Yeah, no, totally good. No one's suggesting that you get rid of it.
I just wanted to add some context and color of like why we're so all on the pigeon.
Yeah, totally.
There's an
Got it.
aspect to mascots that are tuneful.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yes.
right. That's why
I totally
yeah.
understand what you're
Right.
saying, because yes,
you know, you don't
agree
want
with
people
that.
going, what kind of bird is that? You know,
On the pigeon. There's something about it that's been sort of, with me as well, which is that, and I'm glad you explained it, because I had no idea that the pigeon was your unofficial mascot. And your fans, right? You guys have a rabid fan base, right? I'm not the
Yes.
biggest soccer fan, but
Yeah.
MLS has a rabid soccer base, right? They
passionate would be the
passionate,
word.
yes,
Right.
all in on.
Very
But
passionate.
but if you're not super into MLS or New York City Football Club, you might be passing by and thinking, why is that massive bird
Yeah.
on the side of that stadium?
Totally.
Yeah, in concrete, like, and sometimes it looks like a pigeon, sometimes a little bit like a gorgeous pigeon that usually are not our pigeons, right? Usually they're a little, so I just think, I don't know if there's a way to sort of make it clear, and maybe over time it becomes clear, like Mr. Met, I guess when they first unveiled Mr. Met, in the early 60s, no one knew what that was, but now everyone does. But like, I just feel like a lot of people aren't going to get the reference. And just wonder why you put a ginormous bird on the side of your stadium. It's a lovely story, I get it.
No,
but-
I know. I totally understand from an outsider's perspective.
Which is mostly.
Yes, exactly. When you see it, yes, I totally hear you all on that.
Okay, we are at time. I'm going to very quickly summarize everything. So we talked about the materials and more accuracy in the material rendering, which you already said you're going to do, and explore. Isabel suggested exploring either broadcasting or aggregate editions to increase the contrast. We talked about the idea of putting in some kind of iconography related to Queens, which I would offer the idea in your exploration of that. It doesn't need to, if you're doing iconography, it doesn't have to be a real skyline, like it doesn't have to be either or, right?
Yeah.
So, that's a possibility, or some kind of geographic context. We talked about bringing the kind of typeface that you have for the logo into the New York sign, and working on the kind of kerning and the integrity of those two different but sort of, they're really like different fonts, bringing them into alignment. And then the pigeon, when no more needs to be said, think about the pigeon. And then the flag is we talked about making the logo more recognizable and maybe just losing the extra flag. But in conclusion, I want to say, like, this is an incredible addition to the city. I'm excited to see that at first I was a little concerned that you didn't want to put the logo everywhere. And I was kind of like, are they pulling back in some way? But no, great. So congratulations on this great work. We're excited to see it. And I will take a vote now. Roll call vote on item number 29926, preliminary review of the installation of facade graphics for a stadium as part of phase 2 of Willets Point between 38th Avenue and 35th Avenue in Corona, Queens. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Isabel Casilla. Approved. Bill Heinzen.
Approved.
Carrie Maloney.
Approved.
Manuel Miranda.
Approve.
Jimmy Van Bramer.
My dear friend Jenny Lando would be very upset if I did not approve this project, so I very, very happily approve. It's a wonderful project.
And I also approve, so let the record show we have unanimous approval on the preliminary installation of facade graphics at the stadium. Thank you very much and
Thank you very-
congratulations.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you. Seriously.
Okay, we're going to now take a 5-minute break and we will resume at 12:55.
We're coming back from break. I just want to make sure we're live. And live? Okay, great. Over to you, Deborah.
Okay. We'll now begin the committee meeting with the conceptual review of the design of a master plan for Fifth Avenue, future of Fifth, at Fifth Avenue between East 40th Street and East 60th Street, Manhattan. We will not hear public testimony or vote on this project today. Welcome. You can begin.
Good afternoon, commissioners and attendees. I'm Gail Rothstein from EDC. Your presenter today is James Corner from Field Operations.
Hello.
This is a conceptual presentation for discussion and review. It's not formal voting. It's a courtesy for us to share with you where we are and to get your questions and feedback. The three things I want to just say at the beginning is, on the number one, this is an extraordinarily important project for New York. It's an iconic global corridor, Fifth Avenue, Bryant Park to Central Park. It's on everybody's radar. If you Google the best shopping streets in the world, Fifth Avenue is number one. So it's a major, major project, enormously exciting, and will be transformative for the city and for Fifth Avenue. The second thing is it's an enormously complicated project. It's complicated technically because of traffic. The utilities below grade. You can only imagine if you dig a hole what you find. And it's complicated because of multiple stakeholders, many of whom are quite opinionated and have their own agendas. We have 4 business development groups, Bryant Park, Central Park, Fifth Avenue Association, and the Grand Central Partnership. We have DOT, the Parks Department, the police department, EDC, and various owners, in particular Rockefeller Center, St. Patrick's Cathedral, Public Library, as well as building owners, and last but not least, the retailers themselves in terms of the kind of retail street that they want and need to thrive. So you can imagine as a designer, it's enormously complicated because you literally have to develop options and studies and develop arguments about why something is going the way it's going. And that brings me to the third point. We've been at this for 18 months and we've had numerous iterations and options. We've studied various street options, different roadway options, different ways to deal with buses, with bikes, with pedestrians, with seating, with planting, with lighting. And where we've ended up is a point that's quite satisfying because everybody, all of this group I just described, is actually on board. So we've developed a design through a process over 18 months with lots of alternatives and studies and options, lots of discussion and input and feedback. And we're now at a point where we have a conceptual design that everybody seems to be bought into, which is a good place to be in. There's a lot more to do, and I think a lot of your questions will foresee the sorts of things that we still have yet to do. You've seen some of these slides, but they just reiterate the importance of Fifth Avenue as a shopping district. Something like 5,500 people per block per hour on a typical day. At peak time, that's between Thanksgiving and Christmas, as many as 25,000 people a block an hour. The sidewalks are absolutely cheap by jowl, and people end up actually walking in the streetway. You've seen, again, these are in your document set. I don't want to spend too long on them, but you can see that some of the most iconic destinations in the city, Bryant Park, Public Library, all the way to Central Park, the Apple Store, St. Patrick's Cathedral, Rockefeller Center, are all along here. The street suffers from, we say a sense of place, but in some ways it does have its own sense of place. It's typical New York. I mean, Fifth Avenue today has a very New York vibe. But when you go from block to block, there's a lot of variation from block to block in terms of quality, in terms of issues, in terms of clutter accumulated on the street over time. There's a lot of different components. This is just a handful of them, but from tree grates to planters to benches to lighting to paving, there's every portion of every block has a different ad hoc chunk of something. When you look at the different blocks from 42nd Street, you've got a beautiful bluestone paving on the one side, and on the other side, it's cast in place concrete. If you go up to 42nd Street, you can see again the sort of accumulation of clutter and mess on that sidewalk. 49th to 51st, you see the sidewalks are actually, they feel quite narrow, and you can imagine between Thanksgiving and Christmas, these are absolutely immovable. And all the way up to 48th and 60th Street. What we've learned, 18 months of meetings with many, many different stakeholders. As I say, they're not shy with sharing their opinions in terms of what they don't want and what they do want, and often these are contradictory. We've had meetings with CB5 and other neighborhood groups, a public open house in October 2024, which was quite well attended. And again, quite a lot of support came from that. The key priorities, people overwhelmingly want wider sidewalks that are comfortable to walk on, inviting. They want more trees, a sense of nature, sense of greenery. They see the beauty of Bryant Park and Central Park and wonder why we can't have a green corridor connecting those two. And generally a more comfortable environment with a strong sense of place or a distinctive identity. A couple of things that inform the design approach. The first is the character of the street itself, and this is primarily the architectural character. There's a lot of classical architectural buildings, a lot of limestone. There's a lot of Art Deco buildings that are quite decorative in terms of arched doorways and windows. There's a lot of bronze and that kind of gold feel. There's a few glass and steel contemporary buildings mixed in too. So it's an eclectic mix, but overall, it feels like quite a classical street, almost London or Parisian in terms of its character. And the materiality, we like to say it's got a kind of a blue gold thing going on. A lot of the paving has a blue tonality, and a lot of the building facades have a bronze or a gold quality in terms of the limestone, sometimes sandstone, and a use of bronze and brass and other metals that have this kind of quality to them. The roadway today is, you see two 23-foot sidewalks and a 54-foot traffic lane with 5 lanes of traffic. We're trying to add 10.5 feet to those sidewalks to make them now 33.5 feet and reduce the traffic lane to 2 vehicular lanes and 1 bus lane. And you can see this is just really indicative of a lot of challenges we have with regards to be able to have a well-paved sidewalks that don't buckle and damage over time, as well as a really nice line of trees that are planted in a beautiful way and maintain that line. When you look at the elevation, the sort of elements that we're talking about are tree grates, semi-mature trees that are lofted quite high at the time of planting for visibility and also to sort of maintain a line. Low planters, these are only 12 inches high, and in those planters will be a variety of perennial flowers and shrubs, as well as annuals that will be planted by the bids. A decorative light pole that has dual pendants, which is very useful because it's not in this profile, it's actually in that profile. One pendant shines light onto the sidewalk, the other pendant into the street. And two planters that can be moved and located in strategic locations. They're both relatively low, 2 feet and 3 feet. That's because the shop owners want to maintain visibility to their shop fronts. These will be planted in by the bids in a seasonal way, could be as much as monthly. There'll be new plantings in here as part of making sure that there are lots of flowers and color and festivity along the street. And then these are the other elements, the seating element, which is always on a north-south end of a planter in order to keep sight lines up and down the avenue and also keep the clear way clear for pedestrians. The planters have just a 12-inch lift in order to protect the planting beds. They're low enough to discourage seating and to allow instead for lots of lush plantings. The street as a whole could be said to have really 3 components. One in blue is just the long street itself, the streetway. In orange, you have what we call the gateways. These are the primary east-west roads that cross Fifth. And we have what we call 3 piazzas, quote unquote, to recognize the importance of the public library, Rockefeller Center and St. Patrick's, and Grand Army Plaza and the Apple Plaza. That these 3 locations have something that just calls them out, makes them a little bit different from the actual street. So when you look at the street, what we call the connector blocks, you're looking at the new sidewalks, which are 33.5 feet across. There's a 22.5-foot clear path. This is a recommendation by DOT for what they call global corridors. So a global corridor that expects thousands of people every day, the 22.5 feet is that for a clear path. That's about the dimension of the sidewalk today, but that sidewalk today carries with it planters and lighting and benches and all sorts of other things. So now we have a clear path and an 8-foot, 8.5 feet, what we call a sort of social zone, which would have the planters, the seating, the trees, and the light posts. There are 16 trees a block, 8 on each side, and 3 lampposts a block, 1, 2, 3. At the moment, there's a sort of a granite edge as a threshold into the buildings, and then a cast-in-place primary sidewalk, and then a granite strip along the edge. You can see the bus lane is in the center. When the bus wants to pick up, it would move into this lane. It can pick up and drop off. It moves back into this lane. And one of the things that we can talk in more detail about if you like, but it's just the complication of traffic that wants to turn right or left. So you have to pick your lane and get in the lane in order to make that turn right or left. When you look at that same plan, but in a view, we have open, clear corners. We have bulb outs on the east-west streets that reduce the width of the crosswalk. These crosswalks are now significantly wider than they are today. So they're both shorter in terms of duration of crossing, but they're more generous in terms of their width. And you can see the trees and the planters and so on. This is a view of a typical block. This is around about 43rd Street today. You see the width of the sidewalk and the width of the 5 lanes of traffic. And this is it sort of in its new state. So you're going from a street that's pretty much all stone and concrete and asphalt to something that is now tree-lined, much more generous sidewalk and more pedestrian-oriented, more people-oriented. You can see something we're trying to do here, which is to have increased area for soil, to actually try to create as continuous a soil trench as we can. So trees are not simply in little buckets, but have room for the roots to spread horizontally. But we recognize that we're going to have some challenges in certain locations with utilities. This is another view of 42nd Street facing north today. You can see the congestion on the sidewalk, and this is it tomorrow. You see the width increases from the sidewalk being there to going all the way out to there. And it's in that additional space now that we can have plantings with flowers and color and display. We can have trees that are lofted high, so you get clear sight lines along the avenue. The trees go all the way for 20 blocks, and you can see the light poles too lend a sense of sort of classical quality to the street. Another photograph at 43rd Street, and there you have the new Fifth Avenue. The second component are the gateways, and you see here in yellow that we're proposing raised crosswalks. So these are bump ups that are flush with the sidewalks. They're really good for calming traffic and for keeping traffic behind there when there's a traffic light, but they're also keep it safe for pedestrians to move. At the larger gateways, we have raised intersections on the avenue as well as the street. These are inspired in part by things we see in other cities. This is Oxford Street in London, which is a raised intersection. They also have it graphically demarcated. But there are other instances too, where the Federal Highways Administration has proven that these sorts of things help to slow or control traffic, as well as prioritize visually and sensually the pedestrian. So the raised sidewalk here on Cross Street, you see the bulb out here, which reduces the width of that and allows us to increase this dimension so that those sidewalks are clear. And the larger tabled intersection that comes all the way up in all four sides. These are intended to be concrete. The road will be asphalt. And finally, the piazza blocks, the Bryant Park Public Library, Rockefeller Center, and Grand Army. These are raised piazzas too, except for Bryant Park. That is not raised. That's held at its current level. But you recognize that these are landmark destinations along Fifth Avenue. They're highly populated, especially Rockefeller and St. Patrick's, especially during holidays, just tens of thousands of people. So the idea here at Bryant Park, we have the existing bluestone paving and curb, which is beautiful. That will remain. We're going to add 8.5 feet of new granite in the manner of the whole avenue. It reduces the laneways. We have these 4 trees here that are in relationship to the trees that are here. We have the 4 lampposts that form a sort of a gateway and respect the symmetry of the facade of the building. And on the other side, we have a long line of trees. This is sort of an existing photograph today of that bluestone sidewalk, and then the sidewalk widened. So all of this up to that point is existing, will remain, be retrofitted where it needs to be, and then extended out. And you can see the effects of the trees. I mean, it just takes something that is sort of a little harsh with the occasional lonely, bereft tree, turns it into something much more cosmopolitan and a sense of nature. The central piazza, this is at Rockefeller Center. You see Channel Gardens. There's a planter here. This is the one place where we put seating looking into Channels Gardens. That's simply because this is one place where a lot of people gather, and seating would be appropriate there. We do the same at Atlas Courtyard, keeping this side relatively open because Saks Fifth Avenue, the frontage of Saks, and St. Patrick's Cathedral are again very pedestrian heavy. So trying to keep that open, keep the bits and pieces away. And you can see a view there looking into the Channel Gardens and the widened sidewalks. This is a view today looking towards St. Patrick's. This is Saks. Channel Gardens is just over to the left. And the new version, again, lots of trees, a planted bed with seating around, and you know, a sense of the social space. The idea of the piazzas is that traffic on holidays could be closed on those blocks for a weekend or for a day or for an afternoon or for an evening, and therefore allow for a potential setup for an event space or a festival space of some sort. So there you see the overview looking towards the cathedral. And then finally towards the northern piazza, the Apple Store, Pulitzer Plaza, Grand Army Plaza. Treating this, we added planters here in order to direct pedestrians to the crossings. Right now, there's a lot of pedestrians crisscrossing in this particular block. And you can see again the widened sidewalks. We chose not to put trees here in front of Apple because of the Apple Cube, the kind of iconicity of Apple. But also the Apple Plaza itself is very well planted, and there's also lots of seating there. And the same here, we didn't add trees on Grand Army Plaza because Grand Army Plaza has its own kind of tree-like identity. So that's an overview of that. And finally, a before and after. So this is the street today. You can see 5 lanes of traffic, 23-foot wide sidewalks, an accumulation of all sorts of bits and pieces, what we call clutter, that are very different. They don't help to give Fifth Avenue a sense of pride, a sense of place, a sense of quality. And when you go to the after view, you can see this majestic line of trees for 20 blocks. The lights are simply in those canopies, but projecting light safely down onto surfaces below. Widened sidewalks, emphasizing, prioritizing pedestrians, and still a fairly efficient circulation system for cars dropping off, picking up, and for buses. We've been at it for 18 months, a lot of studies, a lot of outreach. We're here, and we're about to start schematic design. It doesn't go for that long. Hopefully in the summer, we'll have a schematic design set, and then the city will decide how to take it further and proceed. So thank you. Questions? I have a great team here. Cricket Day with my office, David with DOT, there's Rachel with Sam Schwartz. So hopefully we can answer all your questions.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, everyone, for coming today. I want to start by saying that we all understand how important this project is for the city, not just for Manhattan, but for the whole city. We also understand the complexities of it, in both under and above ground, and also in terms of the stakeholders. I know my fellow commissioners will have comments and questions, and I do too, but I want to say that the kind of sensitivity that you just described in terms of block by block, but also the reference to, there's a quietness to the design that references other grand boulevards around the world, as opposed to specifically New York idiosyncratic. So I think that if that's your intent, it's well achieved. And I think, you know, there's a long road ahead of you, but I think you're off to a very strong start in bringing this critically important boulevard to what it could be. So I really appreciate that, and I can see that the whole team has been part of that. So before I have specific questions and comments, I want to open it up for Carrie, Manuel, and Bill.
It is going to be a wonderful change the city is desperate for. First thing I went to was to look and make sure that the public library's 10-foot long bluestone and 24-inch deep pink granite curbs were retained, which they were. But was there any effort? We have created with the new Niarchos branch library a campus. And we have opened up with the Marshall Rose new entrance on 41st Street. And I didn't know whether there was any way to how this transition would be at 40th Street. We stop, and yet the library continues right across the corner. And whether there was any way to facilitate our transition, because the whole point was that we want people to go from one building to the other. So.
I think that's a good point. I think we should maybe look at that. Hadn't thought of that actually. But it's a good point, because that you called it a campus. And so
the busiest branch library in the world.
Yeah. So anything we can do to maybe we look at a raised intersection there or something. I don't know exactly if it's technically what the city would consider to be its scope, but I think an argument could be made that to make that gesture towards that whole set of buildings as one campus is a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting presentation. Those moments of the piazzas, I love how that's being treated. Even this idea of, these east-west kind of bridgings, I think that's really exciting. I know it's the start, but just the kind of organizational aspect of it with, pretty economical set of, toolbox. I think it's really great. So I don't have too much to say really, except it was, really exciting presentation. One thing, and I'll say though, actually, Fifth Avenue is my favorite taxi ride in New York going south. And it does have that very New York feeling. And so I think accentuating that with this identity is great. And one thing though is, I can't remember if Fifth Avenue has a bike lane now or not. Is that something that was considered in the circulation, or was there any thought on that at all? No one wanted it.
And we can address that in more detail if you want.
I'm just curious.
The whole bike lane story. I mean, we began with a bike lane, and we had various different plans and layouts, and it was just always an issue in terms of safety and just taking up space. So David with DOT could address the bike lane story a little bit more.
So yeah, as James said, the original intent was to include bike lane. This is one present. And the challenge really wasn't really at the mid-block. Okay. The challenge wasn't so much at the mid-block, it was really at the intersections, where how to strive, obviously create a safe environment for cyclists and manage the conflict between cyclists that are proceeding south along the corridor and left-turning traffic, which is turning off the corridor. What that resulted in was a very fragmented approach to the design on a block-by-block basis, because left-turning traffic was going to have to stagger into what would be a new turn lane to allow cyclists to go through. And what that was left with was a very asymmetrical and disjointed kind of transition from block to block to block. It led to very complex transitions for vehicles that were moving south along the corridor, and it resulted in less pedestrian space at the intersections as well, because of the need to create an additional turn lane. So as James said, one of the key benefits of the project, or one of the key goals of the project, is obviously to maximize pedestrian space. And then as we found at the intersections, with a result of this additional turn lane, was that pedestrian crosswalks would actually become longer instead of shorter. And it was really at conflict with the kind of the spirit of the project. And so while providing a protected bike lane would certainly be a priority for DOT, it would actually be at the detriment to the other road users. And so it was felt that the best decision would be to omit the bike lane from Fifth Avenue. And what we're doing as an alternative is advancing a two-way bike path on Sixth Avenue as the next adjacent avenue, which would tie into an existing two-way section that currently exists at Herald Square. And so you would have some continuity along the Sixth Avenue corridor, which cyclists would be diverted to at 60th Street. So that's the intent from a network
Are
perspective.
those projects contiguous in time? Like,
That's the intent.
yeah,
Yes, yeah. It's likely that that Sixth Avenue would just be an in-house DOT project.
right, right.
It's one that we would-
Because I mean, there are bikers on Fifth Avenue and they're going to need to go somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah, it's very much an intent of the project, as James said, but ultimately it was found to be detrimental to the overall project goals.
Okay. I have another transit question, but I don't want to move on unless we've answered the bike questions. I'm wondering about if you could speak to this. We know that Fifth Avenue has enormous bus traffic, both the local buses and the express buses. And if all of them are traveling in the middle and they all need to pull over, but there's going to be increased traffic on the two side lanes because now we have 3 lanes instead of 5. How will that work?
So from a bus perspective, the current plan, pointing here, this isn't the current plan, but the current plan assumes that existing bus operations will remain exactly as they are today. So there's currently 2 bus lanes on Fifth Avenue, although the west curb lane, although it's marked as a bus lane, is essentially all bus stops. So all the bus stops will remain on the west curb lane. What we want to be able to do is pull some of the bus stops back further from the intersection to allow for right turning traffic, which it does exist on most blocks already. And then all of the throughput for buses will be on what's shown as a center running bus lane, but it's essentially the same bus lane that exists today.
Right,
So-
today there's 2 other lanes. I'm just wondering what. So, sorry, what I'm wondering is when there's heavy traffic times of day,
Mhm.
there will be vehicles on every inch of that roadway, both sides.
Mhm.
What will happen then?
So the western curb lane isn't anticipated for through movement at all.
But it will be used for through movement.
Well, I think that the challenge is the volume of buses which exist on the corridor, as you said, and the frequency of stops. There's bus stops basically on every single block. And so that lane will never be used as a through movement lane, principally because there will always be a bus at a stop.
So is your
So-
position, or rather DOT's position, that there will really be only 1 lane of vehicular traffic that's not buses?
That's correct. Yeah.
And is that what your studies show? I mean, where
Yes,
will
yeah.
all that traffic go?
So we're advancing the traffic study in parallel with the design, so it's not actually concluded yet, but we're working through exactly how that will function, including what the diversions would be off the corridor, what the assumed dispersion of traffic would look like, and what turn restrictions or other restrictions may be needed along the corridor in order to just ensure that only essential traffic remains on Fifth Avenue. But that's a work in progress. It's being advanced in parallel.
Okay, I mean, I think that it seems to me that the answer to that question is critical to the scheme. In terms of coming to the fore in time.
Well, it's more about, as I said, that we're considering a series of restrictions along the corridor, but it's not likely that that would result in any physical change to what's being proposed.
I
It's
understand.
really about how we mitigate the displaced traffic on adjacent corridors.
Right, right. So is that something that you're being coordinating with like NYPD or what?
Yes.
That would be what it would be,
Yeah,
right?
100%. Yeah, all
Right.
city partners are being
Got it.
closely engaged in that effort.
Okay, thank you.
And Rachel is with Sam Schwartz Engineering,
Oh,
who have been doing a lot of quite sophisticated modeling
mm.
at different times of day, different times of year. So I don't know if Rachel, you want to add anything?
Would love to hear, because we've had many conversations about that and it's, an innovation for our city. So we're curious how it will work.
Right. I mean, it's a trend that the city's been doing, right? Is we're trying to put more space for pedestrians and
Yeah.
discourage. And so what we find is with the measures that David said that we're trying to figure out specifically, it shows that 1 lane, while it will be congested during the commuter hours, but for most of the day, it will be manageable because something we also have to keep in mind is today Fifth Avenue has 5 lanes, but it's really only 2 lanes of through traffic because the east curb is normally being used as a parking lane.
Yeah.
Illegal. And then the bus lanes, as similar to what's shown here, is that really those two lanes are being used by buses, whether they're stopping, they're pulling over. So we're really changing it from 2 to 1. And with the measures that David mentioned, you know, restricting certain types of vehicles during certain times of day, we're elaborating on that. But it shows that that would be a significant reduction. And my last point I'll make is that this will be under construction for several years. So
Yeah.
another thought is people, as we learn with 14th Street Busway, other successful projects in the city, that people will find another way, and it might not necessarily be in a car. So.
Right. Understood. Thank you. Questions?
Hi, this is a fantastic plan. Congratulations to everyone.
Yeah.
I just had a question about benches and seating, and I just want to make sure I fully understand from what I'm reading here and what I've seen before. It says, you say you'll take out existing benches in this area. I know this area so well, I can't even tell you where there are benches right now, except
I think there's
the
only,
bus.
what is it, 3? There's 6 total.
6 benches total.
And we are
And
adding.
what's this? So that's 18 seats, basically? Okay, so my question was going to be, is there a net loss in seating? But what you're telling me is there's be
It's a
massive net gain in seating.
a 20-fold increase
Mhm.
over the 6 benches that are there now.
And
But with regards to seating too, a lot of the stakeholders are not keen on more seating. It has to do with how retailers perceive their frontages. And also, again, it's a piece of furniture that can begin to add to the clutter when you are trying to keep a freeway for pedestrians that are, you know, lots and lots of them. So I think we have the right balance of seating because essentially there are 8 6-foot benches per block. And they're oriented north-south in order to keep the clearway clear and to allow anyone who's sitting to actually have a long view up or down the avenue or an oblique view as opposed to just a short frontal view to a shop window. And as I say, the shop owners are not at all keen about people sitting outside their storefront. So I think, you know, believe me, this is probably iteration number 20 of options in terms of seating. We had versions where there was more seating, where there was less seating, where configurations were this way or that way. And this is where we've ended up. And I think everybody's very satisfied with this.
Okay, thank you.
We had last time asked a question about companion seating. I think right now you have it at the end of the bench.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that, Jim?
Well, this is the configuration at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a new set of guidelines out for ADA called PROWAG, which is Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. And they're supposed to be, and they are in fact, more attuned to life on sidewalks than ADA guidelines. They're more specific to pedestrian traffic on sidewalks and in public spaces. And one of the things PROWAG promotes is, on the one hand, this kind of seating where you're at the end of a bench. So if you're with a companion can sit on the bench, you can pull your wheelchair next to them. But PROWAG actually also advocates for a situation, where's that next slide, Cricket? A situation where the wheelchair can actually, the one that shows it pulled in front, I think it might be the next one. This sort of situation where it's more social. So instead of somebody just formally sitting next to you, you actually can pull your wheelchair around and either be parallel to the bench or slightly on a oblique angle to the bench. That this is the kind of configuration that ProWag is really promoting. So, and we have all of this space here that's out of the primary path of circulation. If you go back one to net forward, sorry, there. If you were to try to pull the wheelchair in so that it's out of the way of the primary path, then you end up with a very diminished bench. You've lost 33% of the bench. And also it would require the bench to be pulled forward, whereas right now it's actually in the planter. So we still have a few more studies to do on this. We're aware of the sensitivities about accessibility and people feeling comfortable, and make it sure that it's 100% accessible for everybody. We're going to meet with the MOPD, the mayor's office, for that. We'll run this by them, but we're quite compelled by the ProWag guidelines, which is, yes, a wheelchair next to the bench is one option, but also being able to be parallel or to be able to be more convivial with your companion on the bench is an even better option.
So understood, and no one wants to see the bench get 33% smaller. I guess our request would be to study whether there's a way to make it feel intentional, so that, you know, if I'm in a wheelchair, I don't feel like I haven't been considered. That's the thought.
I think that's a good point. I think in the next step, we'll look at it again, do our best, and again we'll meet with MOPD and go from there.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if there's something that can be designated in a way that it would only become the seat when someone's occupying it, for example, like at the ground plane, or I don't know where, but just something that makes it feel like I've been thought of.
Yeah, I liked, you know, the example from London of the crosswalk where it's raised and it's emphasized graphically. I feel like that, I don't know if that's maybe out of the scope of this project or if that's allowed according to code, but generally I thought like this idea of like graphic representations of, you know, the kind of overall conceptual organization of the project, I think potentially is part of it too, as a thought.
Yeah, the challenge there, and it's turning into a challenge for London too with that particular intersection, is if it's DOT will not support unit pavers, and you would use unit pavers to create the contrast, to create the pattern. And unit pavers in New York are not good, largely because of incredibly cold winters with ice and frost and heaving, and then incredibly hot summers. So that contrast between super hot and super cold is very, very challenging for any kind of unit paving, especially in a roadway with buses and heavy traffic on. So I'm with you. I too, and I think we had some earlier versions where we were looking at graphically trying to play with intersections. I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a famous intersection in Japan, in Tokyo, which just has a massive zebra crossing on the diagonal. And it's really graphic and it's really quite strong. So it's something we'll keep looking at, but there are just a lot of practical and maintenance related issues with that. That they also tend to look better from above than on the ground because you don't see anything. You're so low relative to the view.
Okay, I had a question about the piazzas. This question of putting the curves, I'm just wondering, and this might be like a DOT question, what evidence there is or experience from other cities. If like I get it for when it's a holiday and we're just shutting it down, right? And everyone has to go somewhere else because there's like an ice skating rink or whatever in the middle. But like, how does that function if the whole piazza is marked in the same way for traffic calming and everyday traffic? Like what's the experience in other places?
So the experience in other places and in the city as well. So just as some context, so along the Broadway corridor, for example, we've been rolling out shared streets through our in-house program for the past 5+ years. And so we've been able to learn a lot about how people interact with these spaces, which is really informing, capital efforts like this one and elsewhere. What you see is a very positive traffic calming effect, whereby vehicles are naturally slowed down through visual cues in the street or creating an unfamiliar type of environment. It creates a kind of natural hesitation, which causes traffic to slow and become more aware of their surroundings and the presence of people. As James said, the intent is to create these more flexible spaces, which will allow for a more kind of temporal kind of activations. But the orientation of the street will kind of still very much remain kind of consistent with the remainder of the corridor. The plantings and the lighting and the other street furniture will still remains very much on the kind of strong north-south. So you still have this clear sense of this is pedestrian space and this is vehicular space. As the project advances and we get into further levels of design, we'll think more closely about how the actual interaction between, the sidewalk and the roadway works, what kind of tactile information we need to provide for pedestrians with low visibility to ensure that they're aware that they're transitioning from one type of space to another. But from a day-to-day perspective, the strong kind of verticality of the plan kind of really runs true. It's really about creating an opportunity, as said, for these kind of more temporal kind of activations where the street takes on this greater level of flexibility. So if a bid or another event producer elects to close that block for a day, you're less impeded by the presence of a curb. You have more space for that activation.
Okay, thank you. All right. Before I summarize, any last thoughts? Okay, well, I want to start by saying thank you, DOT, for the good work that you're doing, because I mean, this will be a massive change and we need to understand like where the bikers are going, where the other cars are going. So thank you for that good work. And thank you, Field Ops, for the typically excellent thinking that went behind this and the deft management of massive stakeholders and infrastructure. Appreciate that. And when we see you again, we'll look forward to whatever advances you've made on thinking about the companion sitting, about data related to the traffic calming and the piazzas, and also the various kinds of transit, what you hear about 7th Avenue. But it's about time and it's being done beautifully. So thank you. Thank you for this excellent work.
Thank you for your support and guidance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
So this concludes our meeting and the public meeting is now adjourned.
Yeah.